Breachlock is a global leader in continuous attack surface discovery and penetration testing. Since Breachlock was founded, they are adding over 50 new customers every month. They have discovered over 1 million reported vulnerabilities and performed more than 20,000 pen testing engagements, including pen tests for over 15,000 web applications, 8,000 mobile apps, more than 100,000 APIs, over 10,000 cloud security audits, and over 200,000 network endpoints. They test your entire attack surface and help you mitigate your next cyber breach before it occurs. Know your risk. Contact Breachlock today. Visit securityweekly.com/breachlock. Make sure you subscribe to the Below the Surface podcast by Eclipsium in partnership with CRA. We've had the pleasure of speaking with some amazing guests, including Zeno Kova, Richard Hughes, Vincent Zimmer, and more. We discuss topics related to firmware and supply chain security, uncovering those pesky vulnerabilities that lie, well, below the surface in your environments. You can find all the episodes and subscribe by visiting eclipsium.com/podcast or searching for Below the Surface in your favorite podcast catcher. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Let's see. Tune in to Eclipsium's Below the Surface, eclipsium.com/podcast. We've got all sorts of really amazing guests and conversations on firmware and the supply chain. Most recently, I sat down with Todd Beardsley from CISA. He's actually the lead on the CISA KEV, or Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Project. And he and I chatted about that, which is awesome. Before that, I sat down with Adam Pennington, who works for MITRE on MITRE Attack. So it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of correlations between some of the interviews that we've done recently that I've been enjoying. So make sure you check that out, eclipsium.com/podcast. Let's see. Sam Bound has joined us. Sam, welcome.
Good evening. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to have you. And John Lucades is sticking around to talk about some news with us. And so I thought we'd start off with DNS because it's always DNS. And this week it's always DNS like times 2. I couldn't believe there was 2, even before Black Hat, DEF CON, and all this stuff. This research is being released before Hacker Summer Camp, which is amazing. Sam, if you don't mind, I'll start with Sitting Ducks.
Yeah,
because this is the one I'm most familiar with, and like I'm super excited to talk about it because I can finally talk about it. And I read this, I was like, no, this is not possible. And both our research team and Infoblox was like, yeah, no, like this is actually happening in the wild.
It's such a facepalm moment. It's like, I can't believe this is a thing.
Yeah. So like the high level is I register a domain with a registrar, and in the registrar, I tell it that my authoritative DNS servers for that domain are XYZ. And
well,
then
it's some service.
In some other service other than my registrar, right?
Right.
And then what happens? Well, one of those becomes lame. Like I abandon that at my other DNS, or something happens and I lost control.
Configure it because you're lazy.
I never configure
like me.
it. I let the subscription expire or whatever, right? Then you go to some web hosting provider and you say, hey, I want to spin up a new website. This is my domain. And they go, great, that's your domain. And then essentially I can take over that domain. And now my first reaction, John and I were actually the ones talking about this, which is amazing you're on the show tonight, right? First reaction was, I can't go to like a web hosting provider and just say I own this domain. Doesn't it have to validate it? But it turns out
there's an unlock
that's not
code.
Always the case. That's not always the case.
There's an unlock code that you have to provide to unlock the domain to transfer it, don't you?
So that's not what this is. You're not transferring it. That's why this is so horrific. It's like all these little nuances add up in just the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not transferring it. You're not doing a, like, you know how when you issue certificates and you're looking for like a special TXT record or something like that Acme thing? It's not that. This is, let's suppose that you're me and you're sitting on a bunch of random domain names that you went and paid a couple bucks for, and you're just going to sit on them. But you never configured anything. Except what that day that you bought it, you went in there and you went like, oh, hey, I'm going to use put cloud provider here. And you just pointed at their name servers. Funny thing. anyone with a valid account at that like cloud provider, because no one has claimed it, goes in and creates records that are sitting on that cloud provider's name server now.
Amazing.
You thought you were sitting on domains, but some other guy is now running those sites. It's like, wow.
So I still own it, and I could change the DNS
Yes, you
if I
could.
logged in.
Yes,
If you were
correct.
paying attention, which is, of
But as
course,
long
the
as I'm not
problem.
paying attention, you can have your parked porn, whatever, God
Whatever.
knows what, cryptojacking, malware spewing.
Oh, phishing, like, because that's
All the
awesome because
things.
it's not a new domain, right?
Yeah, but
It's
I
got some
think
age. It's got some age on it.
It's got
and it's got a
age.
history and a reputation,
Yes.
which is awesome if you're spinning up something for phishing.
And that's exactly so.
But-
And
but Josh,
lo and behold,
if you went to
Sorry.
try to get it back, I think your DNS provider would say, no, this other guy already has it.
no, because they never actually registered it with the registrar. You still own it at the registrar. You could actually just
Yes.
go change
Okay.
it. And
In
so
the
you
registrar,
could take it
right.
back, but you have to be paying attention to do that.
Mhm.
And so in particular, a lot of these ones that were discovered here, they're things like brand protection service stuff, where you like are dealing with typo squatting, and you're like,
Mhm.
I'm going to go register all the little typo things for my company, and then I'm going to not set them because I don't want to
Yeah.
use them. I don't want it to go anywhere. Funny thing about that.
But they still would have had to set the name servers pointed at the
You
cloud
do have
provider.
to have what they call a lame delegation, where you sort of you're sort of pointing it at something, but you never finish configuring that.
Yeah.
So it would be
This- a
better if you
similar
actually
thing- you know
configured
what's
all of
funny?
them. Yeah.
I was just going to say a similar thing happened to Larry and I.
Yeah.
Funny story. I don't know if I told you this story, John, but we registered a domain called securityfail.com. Like Larry actually owns, I think he still owns securityfail.com, pointed to
great.
DNS servers, spun up a website at a hosting provider. And it was actually, ironically enough, it was a wiki that had like a bunch of IoT security failures. Like we were just collecting IoT security failures and vulnerabilities, and we're posting them on this website. And out of all the domains and websites that Larry and I collectively ever had to protect, and like Larry's worked in healthcare, we've worked for universities, I worked for a lottery company, no domain has ever been attacked more
Yeah.
than securityfail.com. Just like for the irony and the laws, people were like, and so like after a while, I'm like, dude, I'm tired of trying to protect this thing. Like it's taking a lot of resources. So, but we went to the cloud provider and we're just like, hey, just turn it off. But we left everything else in place, including the DNS records, which still pointed to that cloud provider. Well, lo and behold, I actually think it was a listener, registered a new account with that cloud provider, spun up a new instance, got that IP address.
Oh, you
that
were
we had
patient
configured.
zero.
Yeah. And he's
Wow.
like, dude, I own securityfail.com. He's like, not really. He's like,
Not
but like
really.
right now, because he told us, and then we
He doesn't
went in,
own it, but he does operate it.
but he does
does.
correct.
There you go.
Correct.
He owns it,
And
just
that's
spelled a
pretty
different
much-
way.
Yes.
Right. And that's pretty much this situation, right?
That's pretty epic. That's almost exactly this. I mean, there's lots of different edge cases, around it.
Right.
But yeah, you sound like patient zero. The problem. I mean, there's lots of entertainment here, but in particular, and this is sort of where it gets kind of serious. A lot of things that I talk about are vulnerabilities. So the risk is in a sense theoretical. This is not. There's nothing theoretical about this. The attackers have actually done this, and not just a little bit, like at scale, running like whole traffic distribution systems for malicious stuff, whether it's phishing or whatever. And this technique has been around for a long time, and it's actually not even something that wasn't known.
Right.
In many ways, the biggest problem about this is the fact that nothing's been done about it. And something does need to be done about it, because the problem...
Give me the solution, man.
Oh, man, you're the worst. You just do that every time. But it's really tough because it actually requires multiple parties to collaborate. Oh my gosh, we have to work together.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still pretty opportunistic though, right? Like you would have to be able to like, I mean, this would have to be a targeted type attack, right? Like, and then the chances of that particular scenario set. I mean, like maybe I'm wrong, but like I can't think of a bulk way of. I
Mm.
mean, actually,
That's what I'm thinking of now. How would I write a Python script that I could
right.
go collect this
I
information?
mean, so
check
Right.
out,
you certainly could, right? You certainly could, right?
Yeah.
yep, and
Uh,
people did. So that's the
uh,
thing.
People have already.
And then they
yeah.
did.
So I don't
So
have to write the Python
the
script now. I can just go to GitHub and
problem
download it.
Right.
Right.
the problem is that not just the good guys did that. And so and there are little, your script doesn't have to be perfect is what it really comes down to. You can have a bunch of things that don't work as long as you get a bunch that do. And if you were trying to target somebody with this, that might go poorly because it really depends on
Right.
a lot of happy accidents or
That's
really,
right.
really unhappy accidents, really.
Right.
But at scale, relying on human beings to actually like forget stuff is a pretty safe bet at scale. So that the idea of like running traffic distribution systems, running phishing and that sort of stuff off of a bunch of stuff that's been around a long time and has kind of a history, and let's just run it over those domains. Oh man,
Yeah.
that kind of
Until we get
works.
caught, and then who cares, right? Like,
And then we go to the next
yeah,
one. I
that's
mean,
right. Yeah.
it's kind of terrible because it
Yeah.
really would work.
It's interesting. It's interesting how we stumbled across this, and I don't pretend to, because John's looking at me like, "How do you know?" I'm like, "I don't pretend to know. All I know is that it was Vlad." And
It was Vlad.
Vlad,
It was
I
Vlad.
was talking on the
I don't
previous
even
recording.
really
Vlad just
understand.
has a knack for finding vulnerabilities.
He
It
really
is
does.
ironic because that's not his back. He was a developer, right?
I mean,
But
he was in security for a long time, so I
yeah,
don't, and he played CTFs. That's what it really
that's what
was.
it was.
He's a
We
hardcore
dug into Vlad
CTFer.
an episode of Below
Yeah,
the Surface. Yeah, he did an interview.
yeah.
But he just has a knack for finding vulnerabilities. That
CTFer or not, that there
yeah,
is
like
something special there.
you can't. You're just either you're born with that knack or you're not. Like either you have to work really hard on it. Vlad, it just comes natural. It just finds
He certainly
vulnerabilities.
makes it look that way, at least.
Right? That's yeah, exactly. It's like yeah.
I like
So
to
that's
tell
how we
people
found this one.
it's
It was
not as
Vlad.
easy as I make it look, but
Right.
this is definitely a Vlad thing, and
Yeah.
where it
And
comes
he's
here.
very humble about it too. Because
Yeah.
you know, finally like, dude, that's amazing. It's like, yeah, it's okay.
He
Like,
enjoys it too. He has
does.
that sick sense of humor that you and I have.
Yes, for sure. So that's go up to the remediation is you got to know where all your domains are
Yeah,
registered.
go look at your
and you got to
domains.
look.
Make
But
sure
for a
that you
large
actually
company,
own
that
them.
could be.
Yeah.
I mean,
Operate them.
For Larry, that's a daunting task because he's got to own 1,000 domains,
Right.
at least several hundred
Now,
domains.
the other side to this, and this is really speaking not to that all the masses of people, but in the interest of giving Joshua something, even which I try not to do, but in general, if just something. We really
I've
do
already got a
need.
reputation at your company, Paul, apparently. So
Isn't this great? I love this. But we really do need to get industry players together, people who run DNS, those cloud providers, and
Right.
and we need to create, and the registrars, and we need to create something. And so, like, one of the things that we're going to try to do, as we get some of the attention from this, is sort of say, okay, guys, we were all coordinating on this release of this thing. Let's get together and actually do something that
Yeah. Now
makes this
what can
not
we? Right.
terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And because there are some mitigations that are possible, but each of them acting on their own, it's kind of a terrible mitigation. So if you get together
so
and you do,
as somebody that used to work at an ISP, in a somewhat in the know role, I can tell you that those meetings do happen, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
they and they happen behind closed doors and Chatham House rules, and then also very publicly. But so if there are specific things that need to be worked on, I can tell you that that they do work together pretty well, quite honestly.
But I want
isn't
that's
Nanog?
what we're looking for.
but I want a
Yeah.
solution that doesn't inconvenience people too much. And I know there's this like, security and convenience are always at odds with each other. But what I don't want as a result of this or some of the other things we talked about is to put in so much inconvenience
Mhm.
that I want to throw my Apple devices across the room,
Yeah.
because Apple's account protection drives me absolutely insane sometimes, because they have to protect, and I get it. Like, there's been high profile cases where someone's taken over someone's iCloud account and they're a celebrity or a very important person or what have you. So they
What's
do things in
happening?
their account protection. I mean, you guys know, most of you are probably Apple users, because usually there's 6 people here, right? Is usually one Android user and the rest are Apple users, right? Are you Android, Bill, or are you
No,
Apple?
hell no. I'm Apple all the way.
Yeah, there you go.
Mhm.
Right, and so they've got a quite a large
I just
user base,
completed my Apple ecosystem. I now have a MacBook, an iPhone, and an iPad,
Mhm.
and an
but
Apple
that's what
Watch.
but convenience wise, that's where they force you to have multiple Apple devices. Like, good Lord, God help you if you've only got one Apple
They
device.
don't
And
force you, they encourage it.
yeah,
It's
but
not a
then let's say
We
force.
you're
send an
trying.
I think they
authentication
call it a
request to your Apple
nudge.
device that was from 17 years ago.
I'm like,
that
what?
is lying crushed at the bottom of a landfill. Please acknowledge the authentication request at the bottom of the landfill.
I literally
before we-
I had to add my phone number to all my family members' accounts as a second, and I keep an iPad for every single user and an iPad for me under my Apple ID to make sure no one gets locked out. Okay,
Mhm.
that's what we're coming down to, and it pains me because
Weren't we
I haven't.
talking about DNS?
We were sorry.
It's
I got
always
out a little.
DNS.
I got out a little rant.
Even when it's Apple,
And then
it's
it's even when it's
DNS.
Yeah,
Apple, and it's
yeah.
always DNS. It's either DNS or Apple. All right.
there's
Freaking
something
Apple.
about DNS and certificates and the length of
Is that
Yeah, I know.
that's the other DNS story? I only read up on one DNS story. That was as much as I could handle in my brain.
DNS
this
is an
week.
amazing, let's be honest, DNS is an amazing technology. I think it's absolutely brilliant. Don't get me wrong. However, the problems with DNS and the intersections, especially of networking technologies, when you talk about BGP and DNS and all the different
Josh,
ways
what
that,
you're saying is it's astonishing we haven't resolved all these issues with DNS.
Yeah, well, if it was
No,
just
it's
a
astonishing
blockchain,
we actually
everything
function
would
on
be
the
fine.
internet at all, for fuck's sake.
That was just a joke. That was
Yeah.
a joke.
It's astonishing that the internet has gone past a stumbling block of 4 computers. I will remind you that an
Right.
executive of IBM once said, "I think there's enough room on this planet for 5 computers."
Mm.
I
And
think I have 5
astonishing to
computers on
think
my
there was
desk.
a time before DNS when we had to manually maintain host files on all of the systems on the internet. Until one day, I don't know. I used to remember who created DNS. Who created DNS, the DNS protocol?
Dan Kaminsky.
That's
No, it's
right.
not.
Dan
There
was
you
in-
go. I was going to say it too.
We'll go with that.
Well,
Yeah.
We'll go
remember
with that.
when we had to chisel the IP
Oh,
addresses
man.
into the stone tablets for the host files?
Right.
That's
Okay.
right.
But back then it felt like it was so simple. Like there was,
Mm.
we asked a bunch of servers, like, "Hey, what's the domain name?" And
Yeah.
what's the IP address for this domain name? And that
Mhm.
was simple. And then things got really complicated.
When the whole internet was static. Back when I
Yeah.
was a young man, the whole
I think
internet was static.
that's the problems with DNS is the internet and technology has evolved way faster than anyone could have anticipated when they wrote the RFC for DNS.
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
And wrote the original code. So
Yay. Quantum computing.
That'll fix it.
That'll fix it.
Blockchain.
I'm thinking the blockchain might actually help. Then you'd have.
I'm going to hit you so friggin' hard. Sam, you're going to feel it through the goddamn screen of your laptop, okay?
No,
I can't
I think
wait to
blockchain would
clip.
help.
I can't wait to clip just that exchange right there. It was about 12 seconds of just pure gold.
Absolutely.
So what is the other DNS attack called TuDoor?
Yeah.
TuDoor.
Well, this one is an extension of the basic Kaminsky cache poisoning attack. Now, remember the original Kaminsky cache poisoning attack? You ask a server to look up a domain, and you send it a whole bunch of false responses until you get lucky, and one of them has the right authentication token, which is only 16 bits long, and then you manage to poison a cache server. And it turns out that the modern DNS infrastructure is really complicated with the stub resolver, the DNS forwarder, the recursive resolver, and the authoritative name server. So there are a lot of opportunities to feed something to one of those servers that's that's forged. And these Chinese researchers just went through it, and they found 28 mainstream DNS services and found 24 to be vulnerable. They have a whole chart of these. It led to 33 CVEs. They just found a bunch of places.
This isn't the first. I mean, and Dan,
Yeah.
I miss him dearly. God rest his soul. It was
Yeah.
it's such an
Amen.
amazing person in so many ways. But his original research has been built upon numerous times. Like
For
that's
sure.
how pivotal his DNS research was. I mean, it was a big deal at the time. Don't get me wrong. But now this is like at least the second, maybe third research that I've seen that builds on what Dan disclosed back in the day.
And see, since
just
it's not
amazing.
the blockchain, the servers are not synchronized properly, and you can do this. And
You
so
hear that, Josh? Blockchain. That's the
well,
answer.
that's why I wasn't kidding. I mean, the problem is synchronizing all these servers for a database. And I really don't think DNS is the best technology for that. What we're using now is an old attempt to have multiple copies of a database where many people are changing it, and you somehow try to keep them all in sync, and it's not
Right.
working very well. It's
Do we need
Okay,
caching
Sam,
anymore? Isn't
let
the
me
internet
ask
fast
you
enough? Don't we need do we really need caching anymore? Can we just get
well,
rid
no,
of
no, no,
caching?
no. Wait. I want Sam to answer the question of why an uber slow, power burning pile of utter crap could possibly handle the speed.
Objection, Your Honor, to leading the witness. Come on now.
I
Come
haven't
on
answered.
now.
Sam,
No,
Sam,
I haven't
I wrote
answered.
a patent on using blockchain to handle digital forensic files because it is a perfect chain of custody. It is also one of the slowest chains of custody known to mankind. It's almost as slow as pen and paper.
And this is appropriate for DNS because everybody has to quickly respond to queries, but they do not have to quickly respond to updates. Your updates could take 5 minutes and it wouldn't matter at all. In fact, the default is 86,000 seconds or something. So it would be perfectly fine if it took 10 minutes to update like Bitcoin, as long as everybody had the right data to answer all the queries with the right answer. All these attacks rely on confusing it as it attempts to update it. It's sort of like router interchange protocol. It's a really old system that really doesn't synchronize the databases very well. And it leads to all these problems.
That's interesting.
Sam,
analogy.
Lord knows I love you, Sam, but I'm going to bet $500 that in 5 years we will not be using blockchain for DNS or in place of DNS.
Well, it's a wicked world, and they rarely do what should be done. But
tell me if you take the bet, because I'm not joking.
I agree with you. I don't think people are going to do it because there ought to be some kind of law. If there's a way to limp ahead with what you already have and not make a change, you always choose that. Like, why do so many people have lousy internet service in America? Because they had 56K dial-up, and you can manage to put a little bit more like DSL, and you can get through another year, so you don't really have to lay fiber. So it's always easier to just get along with the thing that only halfway works.
Right.
Is that going
And
to be
if you were going to
Sam's
implement
law?
blockchain, you'd have to replace all the DNS servers everywhere, and that would be a huge cost for not enough benefit. Just patching the holes in this system.
Now we're talking legitimate points.
Yeah, I mean, just patching the holes in the existing system.
I think it's the do nothing alternative.
It's
the do nothing alternative. What's the alternative of doing if doing nothing and it will make it still work?
Yeah.
And the alternative costs me $100,000. I'm going to do nothing.
And they're doing a little more than nothing. They're patching these vulnerabilities as we find them. So it's the same. We're riding in this boat and patching the holes as they appear, and on we go.
It's like trying to rivet the wing on the plane while the plane is taking off with a hammer, not even a hand riveter, But I agree with you.
Yeah.
I want to transition to Bill's world where he's only patching local privilege escalation vulnerabilities, and that's my story number 6. And this is a series of posts from the 0-Day Initiative, and they are talking about breaking barriers and assumptions, techniques for privilege escalation on Windows. This is actually part 2. Much of the article was focused on what looked like exploiting vulnerabilities in EDR and antivirus software to gain privilege escalation. Now, what's interesting about that is we're all reminded of how these solutions work because of the CrowdStrike incident, right? We really dug deep into the kernel drivers for, in this case, Windows, where it runs in the boot sequence. We got a refresher on the boot start, which actually I wasn't super familiar with. And then I was like, oh, like it makes sense. If a Windows driver has to enable my RAID array, it has to load, and it has to load, and it has to load before I initialize my RAID array. And if it fails to load, there's not much Windows can do about it. So it goes, and it's not necessarily a blue screen crash, it's a recovery screen. There were some Windows, pundits that were like, whoa, wait, don't call it a blue screen crash, because it's not actually Windows crashing. It's actually a driver that's accessing memory that doesn't exist. And since that driver is marked as boot start, then it can't, Windows is like, I can't load. There's ways around that. But what that comes down to is with antivirus or EDR products, they typically load inside of the kernel. And because they want to get as much of a head start on whatever's loading into the operating system, they're loading in boot start mode, because it goes back to what Ed Scotus told me in like 2004 when we were learning about kernel level rootkits. I was learning about them like in a class for the first time. I had known what they were. Ed's going through the material. He's like, the best way to detect a kernel level rootkit in general is to already be in the kernel already, is to have another kernel level rootkit in there that detects other kernel level rootkits, because that's how deep in the system you have to go. I'm like, wow, that makes so much sense. And here we are, we have EDR that are essentially kernel level rootkits that are trying to detect and prevent other kernel level rootkits.
For sure.
CrowdStrike. What? I'm sorry. What'd you say? CrowdStrike? What? Anyway.
But when they have a vulnerability, you can exploit those as an attacker and gain a high level of privilege within the operating system, which is where, so like we do this all the time, right? We adopt new technologies to make us more secure, that yet increases our attack surface even more and gives us more things that we have to protect. And so that's where this one
Doesn't that sound typical?
It does, right? Like it is typical in so many instances. But it's interesting. There's also like a bypass. So like if you can find a vulnerability in something, or like we talked about earlier, get in before the operating system, you can disable and bypass those EDR and AVs. And if the AVs and EDRs were blocking everything, well, we wouldn't have ransomware. So we have this like trade-off of more attack surface, and that
There's a solution.
we take basically defending more of an attack surface over not having that protection at all.
No, wait, seriously. There's a solution. Just start with a virus as your operating system.
Right.
It's turtles all the way down. Like,
I was going to say, it so is.
How do you handle when to solve the problem of rootkits, you have to have a rootkit? Like, this is not cool. I get the concept. That's neat, but however, this is like the people that were like, oh, there's do you remember, like, God, it was 2 decades ago or a decade ago, there was a virus that was making the rounds and killing a lot of stuff. And then people were like, I just created a virus to fix the virus and patch the patch behind it. Like, and everyone was like, that's cool, but
if either of those things go wrong, though, then you have a system that doesn't boot. And what would you rather have? Would you rather have more ransomware or occasionally a system that doesn't boot? Right?
But
like,
if you just put test keys and you just publish them on GitHub,
right,
then
you're good.
Everything is okay.
Isn't this what secure boot is supposed to fix? It's supposed to verify the operating system on the VM. Isn't this the whole point?
No. Well,
remember,
I mean, it's related, actually. It's very
related.
The hero or live long enough to become the villain.
That's it.
But these drivers in Windows, are they signed by Secure Boot, or are they signed by
They're
Microsoft?
Signed by Windows. Yeah,
they're signed by Microsoft Windows.
These are driver signing things.
Driver signing is independent of Secure Boot.
They're supposed to marry up, so you're supposed to get to the operating system through UEFI Secure Boot, but then the operating system is now responsible for keeping itself good.
For maintaining integrity from that point forward.
Yeah.
Right.
There was this whole set of research that sounds a lot like this. And you just sort of reminded me, because it kind of crosses the boundary between these OS rootkit / security modules and firmware stuff, because the concept was that, there needs to be a safe place to stand when you're going to do an assessment of the thing. and you're going to assess yourself. Maybe not the best solution, might be the only solution if you don't have any safe place to stand, which is sort of where you run into this problem. But one of the things that they did, and this was related to system management mode and the place that you would put an integrity checker, because you can put an integrity checker in the kernel to like validate
Is it
user
time?
stuff.
Paul, is it time? Should we talk about it?
Talk about
Is it
what
time
now?
to discuss that paper? The compiler that compiled the compiler that compiled the compiler?
Yeah, like where do you establish the root of trust? It's a
Let's
great
do
point,
it.
Josh, actually. Yeah, it is. I mean, the other thing is if you put something in this process that causes a failure, your system's this is very fragile.
Yeah.
Right? If you're dumping out into SMM, well, not really independent of the operating system, and you reference memory that doesn't exist, that's going to be a bad day, right? And even if you're outside of SMM and you're in the Windows kernel, that's
Same
what
thing.
happens.
You're still
right?
causing
Same
a bad
thing.
day.
Right. So
can we do
I
rent a
don't know.
secure kernel? Like subscribe for a secure kernel. I'll just deliver one to your house every day or something. I don't know.
Isn't that essentially what iPhones do?
Well, and that's an interesting point, because I was just thinking, as John, as you were talking about this, you need a safe space. You need a place to stand that is actually a trusted spot that I believe is clean, where you start from, and it holds your keys, and it holds your certificates, and it holds your, a clean
The
kernel.
ones that you check in on GitHub.
Yeah.
Right.
And of course, like, and that you put in plain text, right? Just to make it easier. No, but I'm thinking,
and it
like,
says do not trust.
This is an impressive device in terms of cryptography. And it a while back, and I'm probably showing my age because the bald haired and white beard don't. But a while back there was a movement to make your phone, like there would be a dock for your phone, and that would be your laptop, and that kind of thing. Okay, and that's actually, like, still. I mean, I've written, I can't tell you how many stories on my phone, or done research on it. Hell, in Asia, I think it is, there's a significant percentage of people that don't have computers; they just have their phones. They live on their phones and tablets, and that's cool. Although if anybody references the Apple commercial where they go, "What's a computer?" I'm going to smack them.
That's so violent today.
Yeah, but
I'm in
the
a
thing
mood,
with the
okay?
but the thing with the Apple ecosystem, right, and locking down kernel access is they also lock down any visibility, and so you have to completely trust Apple that they're delivering you a secure phone.
So this is sort of a really key point, and it does kind of come back to that earlier research that I was talking about, because you have the potential for all of these same problems, and you're right that if you mess up in system management mode, well, you're really messed up. That's going to be bad. They've the same sort of chain of research papers by different groups kind of did the same thing in a piece of hardware, and I think they actually have been used in option realm. But the idea was kind of the same thing. You're trying to be independent of the thing that you're checking.
Right.
But you can always get into this situation where whatever it is that you're in is now also potentially the target. And it might be just as vulnerable as the other thing was. I think many ways, though, the thing that you get right in some of these phone ecosystems is that people are more on board with the threat model of, I am not messing with this thing. This thing does whatever it does. It's an appliance. It's not and it's not that it can't. It's that people's perception or expectation is such that they don't want it to do anything else.
Right. They want it to be a phone and run some apps and whatever.
But then, of course, there's that other movement around, like, no, I actually just want it to be a phone.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting implementations around that.
Yeah,
for sure.
I mean, it is a physical access, physical, what is it? Physical access device, physical access token. It is a, I don't know, like it
has a security processor sort of separate from the main execution environment. Yep. It has its own secure boot, has a whole lot of integrity checking.
Does. It's an
It's
interesting thought.
interesting.
I
Could
mean,
we reach a point where our platforms are secured by the manufacturer or vendor without third party support?
I mean, I think
I
But then
that's
would
you're
who's
kind of
checking the
argue
checker?
describing Apple, right? I mean, that's
Right?
kind
who's
of
That's
what,
Apple.
watching the
yeah,
Watchmen.
yeah.
Right.
I would argue who's
Mhm.
watching the Watchmen, right?
quis
Like they,
custodiet ipsos custodes. Yes.
But
yes.
that's what this article's calling out as well at the very beginning, and I quoted it was that they said, where is it? So, due to paywalls and other obstacles, several vendors and products on the market remain untested and may be vulnerable to the weaknesses we're about to share. We strongly recommend that defenders evaluate their products for potential issues. Additionally, we encourage vendors who do not currently offer free trials consider them making available, enabling researchers to conduct this research. This is where we get the how do we evaluate the walled garden
That's it.
if it's not available to secure? We run into this in firmware all the time. Our firmware is not available. You need a customer support contract, and our firmware is encrypted. Great, but how do I check what's in your firmware? How do I get an SBOM if you haven't provided one? If it's encrypted, how do I dig in and do security research? Do any kind of checking? How do you checking on iOS if it's? I mean, it's completely walled off. Same thing with their kernel. They don't allow kernel modules.
There's been a ton of development teams that I've worked with where this back and forth debate happens, where it is a security by obscurity debate,
Right.
but
Right.
at some level, a lot of us who are very steeped into the security world don't actually give enough credit to the security by obscurity thing. There was another paper that actually did some analysis on this, and it's kind of cool. There's a certain amount of, if you were so obscure as to be cryptographically secure, now we're all on board, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you have to solve P equals NP or something, but we're not. And so there is something intuitive that a lot of these developers are going to look at and say, no, if I don't make it easy for you to understand, then I didn't make it easy for the attacker to understand, and that's
Mm-hmm.
fair.
Yeah,
However, the attacker has all the time in the
that's right.
world to go
Mhm.
figure it out. You
And
know
they
who
just need the
doesn't have?
motivation.
They have the motivation because they're the ones attacking, right? They're
Yeah.
intrinsically motivated for this. The
Right.
problem is, who has no time for this? Is just like,
That's right.
seriously, I got other problems. This is not, I don't even want to be thinking about this.
The
That's the
IT guy.
defender.
That's right.
That's the
Right.
defender.
Right. So
Mhm.
complexity, right. So it, regardless of where you are, complexity adds an attack surface, right? So
Yeah.
simplicity, right? Like that for sure.
Yeah.
I was gonna move on to let's talk about something kind of fun. MIT researchers advance automated interpretability AI models to investigate. Oh, the Sam's not here. I'm going through this, and Sam's not even here. This is his story. All right. Well, let's wait till Sam gets back to cover that one. Let's jump to um where do we want to go? Oh, how to make adversaries cry. So, in this blog post series, they're going to delve into high level security controls within Active Directory that can make an adversary cry tears of frustration when attempting to establish their foothold. So, the areas covered are SMB null sessions, username enumeration, password spraying, and abusing NTLM authentication. Now, it's interesting. The first thing they call out there is SMB null sessions.
Yep.
And some will say this show is old people smoking cigars,
Hey, hey,
talking
hey,
about the
hey.
good old days, right?
I'm not smoking cigars.
And I'm like, okay, but here's an article that was posted like the other day by GuidePoint Security talking about SMB null sessions. In 2002, I
Yep.
wrote an article on null sessions, okay, and why they're bad and why you should go through these steps to get rid of them. I actually updated the paper in 2005, and then after that, it kind of fell off the internet. But the Wayback Machine was able to recover it for
I would
me.
have to dig into very old archives to find any presentation I had on null
Yep.
sessions. Like at this point, it's eclipsed by so many other frigging things.
But what they say is attackers still use it against
They
domain
do. They
controllers, right?
absolutely do.
To
Right.
enumerate,
Yeah.
because domain controllers they don't have, but usually run it in such a way so that it's backwards compatible with older operating systems. And what they say is you should remove the everyone and/or anonymous login special identity groups from the pre-Windows 2000 compatible access group. And that's why it's there, for pre-Windows 2000 compatibility.
Mhm.
What if you ran your domain controller in like native mode, not backward compatible mode? Wouldn't that fix this?
Is that a thing?
Yeah,
Is
I
that a
mean, when
real
you first
thing?
install a domain controller, like you're doing server 2020, or what is it, 2019, whatever it is, it'll say, do you
19.
want to do it in native mode, in which case all the domain controllers at your enterprise have to be this version or later,
Right.
or do you want backward compatibility because you have Windows NT domain controllers on your network? And that seems to me like the origin of all this.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so many other things.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
Bill, you're still seeing this today?
Yeah, so I was really interested in this article. So I've also given a presentation that was something similar around. So the title of my presentation was "The Greatest Gift," right? So,
Yep.
and
It's funny. I gave similar presentations to, like, as pen testers, this is what we're seeing in your Windows environments,
yeah,
and you should fix this crap
right.
like
And
that.
so that's really what, when I read through this article, what, and don't get me wrong, I'm not talking shit on this article at all, but what I saw
No.
was this was their pen testing like playbook is what I saw.
Yep.
This is what they're running in their clients, and they are succeeding with these. And
they're tired of succeeding, so
they're
they wrote
tired.
this
Yeah,
article to be
that
like,
is
please
exact.
fix this stuff,
That is
because we don't want to do this anymore.
right. I'm
Yeah.
You know how
tired of,
many-
yeah, I'm tired
Yeah.
of just doing Control F and, find replace with the company name and same,
Yep.
same recommendations year after year. Right. So, but
So
yeah,
sad.
yeah. Like, who was it the other, we had a, it was the Sonic wall guy that we had
Yep.
the other, like, said, I quit pen testing because I was tired of being so easy.
You know,
Right.
I've
Yeah.
heard that
Yeah.
from a lot of pen testers. Just the same thing.
Oh,
They
this was
just get
Douglas
so
McKee. Do you
bummed.
know Doug? Do you know Doug
Oh, I
McKee,
know
John?
Doug, of
Yeah.
course.
Okay.
Okay,
You
so
guys work together at
that's
McAfee or something? Yeah.
he's one more that
Mm.
is in this pile of people who are like, I just can't do this anymore. I can't
Yeah.
Mhm.
feel like every single time I say the same thing and then never gets fixed.
Yep.
It's really
That's why I went into
unfortunate, actually.
compliance. Honestly, I was not a pen tester, don't get me wrong, but I was in security and incident response and digital forensics and everything. And I moved into compliance for two reasons. One is because I can actually get things done. I can influence budget from compliance because I can go, no, jackass, you have to do this.
Mhm.
Right.
Oh, okay. And budget magically shows up. The other reason is, of course, there's never or very rarely a 3 a.m. GRC emergency.
Yeah. It's a great point.
You
By the
know,
way, I stole that
suddenly
from
I have never heard a better case for going into compliance.
Mm.
Friday afternoons when all of you guys are going, oh God,
That's
don't drop
right.
another 0 day. Don't drop another 0 day.
It's
I'm like,
always Friday.
Mhm.
It's always
bye.
Friday at 4:30.
Yeah.
Yep.
We call them
I
Friday
go
at
home at
fours.
dinner.
That's what we call them, Friday at
I
fours.
want to talk more about local privilege escalation. This is like my favorite topic. So someone made a vulnerability disclosure this is in the Raspberry Pi AP or RASP AP project. And what's interesting is they came up with their own CVSS scoring for it. They rated it on the CVSS 3.1 scale as a 9.9. And I was like, well, I just stood up RASP AP this week as an experiment. And I'm like, so I should pay. This is how, well, actually, I think I saw this first. And I was like, what's RASP AP? I'm like, oh, it's basically a script that you run on your Raspberry Pi, like Raspbian OS, and it turns your Raspberry Pi into an access point because I'm lazy and I don't want to configure host APD manually. And I'm like, cool, someone created a script for that. And I just run it. And then I get a web interface and I put my AP in bridge mode. And I'm like, I'm going to test out an AP. And then I looked back. I was like, so what was the vulnerability? And it says it's a local privilege escalation in RASP AP. And I'm like, and you gave it a 9.9. I don't think you understand how to score in CVSS. Regardless of the version, I think you're missing something
That would
there.
be the first.
Yeah.
Never seen
And
that before.
it's really just a system D
sarcasm?
service file that has the wrong permission. So the www-data user can edit the systemd service file, and all they did was change the set UID bit on the bash binary. And so then after you reboot, you can execute bash as the root user. I was like, that's kind of lame for a
I mean,
lot of
to be fair,
reasons.
that's what you get when you're running an AP running on a Raspberry Pi, to be honest. I mean, like, do you
I'm being
expect
shamed
anything?
for this.
Do you expect anything else different than that?
You know what's
No.
funny is you could probably dig up in the archives where I poo-poo people for trying to run their own access points on Linux, because I'm like, it's too much work. You got to spend your time on better things, and for some reason I'm like, you know what if I just try and do it myself? I think a mutual coworker of John and I, Chris, pushes me in this direction, right? And I'm like, I'm gonna do it on Linux, and I've got a Raspberry Pi laying around. I've got a really cool USB dongle from Alpha. I forget which one it was, but it's on like the supported list to be like used as an access point. I'm like, I have all this gear. I don't have to buy anything, which was kind of a sad moment because I love buying things. But so I get it all set up, and I was like, this is terrible. Like it was really, really terrible. I used the internal Wi-Fi card on the Raspberry Pi at first, and that was really terrible. Then I switched to the USB one, was a little better, and I got it running, and I connected to it, authenticated, and I used it for a while. I did some speed tests. I'm like, cool, I'm going to try and work on this for the day and see how it goes. And then at some random point in the day, it just stopped working.
Yeah.
And then I was like, you know what? I can't deploy this in production right now. Like I could probably spend a lot of time and try and figure out how to make it stable. I'm like, but I can't deploy this in production right now, and I don't want to spend the time. So I'm just gonna, you know what? My older Ubiquiti access points are probably just fine for right now.
Yeah.
And they work.
I just love the thought of somebody, well, I'm going to deploy my Raspberry Pi into production.
Production, right?
Yeah.
To be the access point for the studio,
Yes.
where all the things connect to.
You tell your wife, hey, watch what I can do, and then a
yeah,
week later, when the internet sucks,
yep, it's very. I was like, nope, this is not for me. I tried though. I
Because
mean,
we
at
all
least give
haven't
me
been there.
for sure.
I know, like at least give me an A for effort. Like I tried.
No,
I
I give you that.
I was like, what's it like over here in like, true Linux nerdery dork land where I want to do everything myself in open source? And I'm like, wow, this is a world where everything is a lot of work.
Yeah.
You're right.
I think the difference is, when you talk about Chris pushing you that direction, the difference is that he actually wins and
He
it
does.
works when he does it.
It's amazing. And then I realized that I'm not Chris.
Yes. And then you realize why you are not Chris.
Yeah, right.
I have also come to this realization.
Yes, right. There's only one Chris in this world.
That's right.
And yeah, man. And he's awesome. And we love him. But yeah, I'm not going to do this. But what's funny is in the disclosure for this, the Raspberry Pi people did not get back to this person at all with this vulnerability.
Oh.
But I'm like, also, I need shell on the box, and then I have like a privilege escalation, which I'm like, okay, I'm like, that's maybe a CVSS of like 5.5 or something.
Yeah.
And yeah, you should fix it because the fix is so easy. You should just include this. Like, don't not respond to the person. Like, just fix it. Like, I mean, just fix. You just basically you have to like add one line to your installer script to set the right permissions on this file, and then you're done. So just go do that.
On the plus side, if they didn't respond, that means they also didn't threaten legal action. So I mean, it could have been worse.
Could have been worse. Could have been worse.
You've been scarred, Lucades. You've been scarred
in all the wrong ways.
Also, like I really thought someone told me that host APD was much better than it was in the past, and clearly that's not true, like at all.
Well,
in my experience,
it might be better than it was in the past,
Right, which is not saying much.
Right, yeah.
Right.
It's better than when I walked uphill both ways in the snow with no shoes and my leg cut off if I was late. But, I
mean, there was also a time before we had Raspberry Pis. Along those lines, I did find RADXA. How would you say that?
They're sold out, damn it. I've been looking at them.
Oh, you have been. So this is a Raspberry Pi based computing board, Intel N100 processor, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet. I'm like, oh yeah, now you're speaking my language. Like I need one of these. I don't know what I'm going to use it
And
for,
they've
but
got
like
PoE
I need one of
hats.
these, right?
And they've
You
got
see the
PoE
one-
hats, and they've got like all sorts of really cool stuff on them, and they're tiny, and they're like $70 for
Right.
full on 8 gig of memory with a reasonable processor, 3.4 gigahertz.
There's
Like
something
four
around
cores.
there. It has 4 2.5 gig Ethernets, and I'm looking at
What
that
does?
and drooling.
Oh,
There's
one of
something
their-
like that. One,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's exactly that one, but
See,
What's
this
the
is when
one of
name?
them has 4. And
yeah,
was
you
like,
buy that, and that's how
yes.
you end up building your own router, right?
Yeah, then
Like,
you're gonna want to build your own access point, and then you're
Mm.
gonna end up
Uh-huh.
right where I
That's how it
ended up. And
starts.
you'd be like,
It always
With
With
only
starts. It starts with
70
the
hours of
drooling.
work,
That's-
you too can
yeah,
have the equivalent of a
right.
$50 router.
Yeah, but Josh, I spent 2 weeks making a custom case for it on my 3D printer.
Yes.
Not helping yourself.
I soldered the antenna connectors
Wait,
on
wait.
myself.
This actually works for this too.
Oh,
Yeah.
I spent 2 weeks, man. I made a custom case. I painted flowers on it. I put it on a VW bug chassis. It's awesome.
yes.
Oh,
I'm
gosh.
sorry. It just fit.
But yeah,
I did full open source, right? It's core boot. It's beautiful. I don't know if core boot supports it, but you know,
you might
get
need
into
a
this
longer
open-
beard if you're going to do the full on FSF thing.
This is true. And I've never been that person where I'm like the open source zealot, like everything has to be open source, because I find it's just a terrible place to be.
It's just hard. I want
But I
to
find
do
also
it.
secure, right?
I want to
Security
be.
wise, I don't think it's that much better because everything falls on me.
At
And
one
like, good
point,
Lord,
I
I'm
thought
lazy. I've got
so.
to, my projects have projects. I don't.
Yeah, like that's
yeah.
what happens is that I got to the point where I was like, except I can't keep up with this. So there's no way that I would do all of those other things.
Right.
So-
Anyway, I still want one of these.
So that's why
something.
you should run your own PKI hierarchy.
Yeah, this is but this is something we've always talked about on the show. Like, you know, like
The fuck is wrong
how
with you?
how in like Linux distributions, right? Like, are you what's the like cheesiest does everything for you? Like, there's some flavors of Ubuntu that try and be like Windows
Mint.
kind of thing. Mint, right, is all the way on the left hand side, and then like Linux
Gentoo.
from scratch
Gentoo.
is and then like you can build your own Linux distro. Then one step down from that is Gentoo, and then I think we get into Arch.
Yeah.
Maybe, and then like I'm like not even pure Arch, I'm Manjaro, so I'm like Arch with training wheels is where I sit. And like in general in technology,
You
like
let somebody
Arch
else compile your code?
yeah, I'm like Arch with
Oh.
training wheels is usually where I sit. Right, it's like somewhere like right in the middle is where I like to be.
But
For-
you already brought up trusting trust once, right? With that old paper, right? So not only are you going to compile everything yourself, you're actually going to double compile everything to make sure that you didn't actually introduce a bug in the compiler. That's backdooring
I'm gonna
your
check
stuff.
all the signatures of everything that I pulled down.
Oh, that
all
too.
the
Yeah.
time,
Mm-hmm.
which is fine until someone loses a key, because that never happens.
Well, I mean, they're test keys anyway, so what?
Yeah, it's just test keys. Oh boy.
I like Sam's number 5. So the Windows Hello for Business.
Yeah.
Sam, you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, it's pretty simple and pretty horrible. I mean, it's in Windows Hello is supposed to work even in Azure, I think, and you can supposedly log in with biometric authentication, but if you put a attacker in the middle, they can do a downgrade attack and downgrade it to like a one-time password sent by SMS, which you can phish. So it does seem like a pretty serious flaw in Windows protocol.
Yeah. So one of the things that stood out to me was, that attackers are once again leveraging evil jinx to perform this attack, and we are seeing, like, I don't know, man. This is really kind of the first time in my career, that evil jinx, like, it's probably how the old people felt when Metasploit came out, and like, when they were, you remember that time when they were like, we should classify Metasploit as as like a weapon of war.
Weapon.
Yeah, right. You
Yeah.
remember that, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of how I feel about, Evil Jinx is brilliant and it's amazing, but god damn, that thing is scary, right? Like
Yeah.
it is
Old
truly
people?
yes.
Old people, Bill?
Yes. Yeah.
He went
Yeah.
there.
Old people
Hey,
like us.
we're the same age, homie. I can if I'm calling you
I
old,
know.
I'm calling me old, so it's all good. But yeah, that is definitely something scary, like, because I do think that people are kind of trusting Microsoft Windows Hello to be phishing resistant, right?
Yep.
And
How are they doing a
Well-
reverse proxy man in the middle to Windows Hello? Is it on the back end?
some sort of downgrade is from
Yeah.
what I
Well,
understand.
I have to get in the middle.
Bill, that's the
first,
same
though.
thing in cell phones. They do a downgrade attack to get it off of 5G down to a
Well,
crackable
like
encryption.
my Windows laptop right here
So-
uses Hello, like has facial recognition to log me in.
Is it
Yep.
a local thing or is it a remote thing? Are they going back to
That's
like
my
Entra
question.
ID in Azure and they're downgrading it that like in that pipe, or are they doing it local?
So
Is it the local?
So I
app?
think it's when it's not the login, like when you're logging into the device. It's
okay.
when it's calling the Windows Hello to do some
Right.
other sort of
Something
authentic.
else.
Yeah,
It's
And
the
it's the
post
local
request.
part of that they're
It's-
downgrading?
It's like the
I believe
start of a
so.
VPN. You send a post request telling it get credential type to decide what kind of credential you're going to use. It intercepts that
Okay.
and changes it to an insecure modal. So it would. One thing I'm not finding here is if there's a patch. This is just like the domain controller one we were talking about earlier. All you have to do is configure your server to say, I'm going to use the modern technique and I'm never going to use the old ones anymore. And there probably is some way to do that.
Basically, like deprecating a cipher suite type of thing.
Right.
I was totally going to make a joke about Rot 13. Yes.
Exactly.
No, look, Rot 13 is bad. You have to do Rot 13 twice.
Oh, that's right.
The actual secure one. Okay.
So one of the things I do want to call out about this article is that the security researcher Smirnov from Accenture is going to be talking about it in Vegas next week at Black Hat.
Nice.
So on August 8th, and so that then there makes my list of something that I would like to see.
And I see they do have the patch.
But also then there's a reality of, Bill, you're not going to go to any talks at Summerfield.
Well, that's true. Right. That's
There
true.
is that.
Also, there's also this new reality that I just became aware of is that starting today,
There's talks at DEF CON?
I'm only going to wear this shirt. I'm going to try to wear this shirt all through Black Hat and DEF CON next week. So if you see me,
what shirt is that?
Well, it
Can I
doesn't
see
matter. It doesn't
Oh, okay.
matter. Yeah, but just
You're going to be the only one wearing the same shirt all week.
Just
I doubt it.
Thinking
ever
about
been to a
the
HackerCon?
future, Paul, you also are going to be wearing the same shirt all week.
Oh, this is true.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen of the audience, please remember the 3-2-1 rule.
That's right.
3 hours of sleep, 2 meals, 1 shower. That is daily. Repeat,
Daily. That is daily. Daily.
Every 24 hours, you should have at least minimally 3 hours of sleep, 2 meals, and 1 shower. Deodorant is available. Use liberally. Thank you.
1 bourbon, 1 shot, 1 beer.
Oh, I want to go to actually hacking traffic lights.
Hell yeah.
And not through like the infrared stuff that Bill put on his web. Was that your research or someone else's, Bill?
That was someone else's, and then I built it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then, so you implemented, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But this is different from that. This is a security researcher. We should give him a shout out on the show. I feel like he deserves it because he got like a Andrew Lemon. Because in this series, this is the same person I believe we talked about a while back that got a letter from the company that he was trying to disclose the vulnerabilities to. He got a letter, and it was very much a threatening letter. Like, you violated the Title 18 Computer Fraud and Abuse Act and or similar laws. I guess there are similar. I'm not familiar with similar laws to Title 18. Again, at
18 USA 1029 and 1030. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it was just not a nice letter. It was like, hey, you found vulnerabilities in our product, and hey, guess what? like, thanks for that, but if you talk about it, we're gonna sue the pants off of you, kind of thing,
That's
which we
known as
all.
full disclosure. Please start the countdown.
And that's what Andrew is doing. Now, apparently Andrew's talk did not get accepted to DEF CON,
That's
um,
unfortunate because
which is
this is
very, I don't like to, like, knock the CFP review boards. They have a job to do, and they're
and
usually
thousands
people,
of papers to pour through.
Yeah.
Right.
lots of paper, and they're usually people that we all know and love in
Yes.
the industry that are
They
looking at these
usually are.
papers. So, like, I didn't, like, maybe there's reasons for that, like, but in sometimes the people who are reviewing the papers don't know who made the submission, and I think this is a case where, had they known that it was Andrew and what Andrew had gone through, they might have been like, oh yeah, we should let him speak. But
Remember, there are alternatives. Besides Las Vegas, any of the villages, many of the villages would love that talk.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if the time has passed for
Yeah, it's
Andrew
too late.
to
They'll
submit,
make
but
time
Andrew's
for that
making
one.
Andrew's making a blog post series, and and now we get to see, like, the first inclination I saw of this situation was just a letter, right, on Twitter. And now we get to see a little more about what Andrew's been up to. And he's been acquiring, I believe he said, like, on eBay, traffic control systems. So these are like the computing, he's got pictures of them.
Cool.
They look like industrial, IoT based equipment kind of thing, or ICS equipment. And they've got these massive connectors on the front, which I'm assuming is what actually connects the traffic light to the traffic controller. And he proceeds to do what I would term as, like, classic embedded systems IoT device. Let me hack the thing. And so he's port scanning it. He's trying to get into the web interface. He's password brute force scanning it. And what I love about these write ups is when they just don't talk about the successes. They talk about the failures. He's like, wow. He's like, I tried this, and then I did this, and then I did a factory reset. And then he was like, well, off to eBay to buy another one. Like, dude, I love it.
That
Like,
sounds right.
this is a messy process, right? Matt Brown talks about this in his amazing YouTube channel, right? If you haven't looked at Matt Brown's YouTube channel, he talks about this too. He'll talk about, like, I use this tool. I think we talked about it last week, to read this spy flash chip, or it was a eMMC memory, and he's like, it kind of sucked, right? And I tried and I tried and I tried, and yeah, I got it working, but, like, there was more failures than there were successes in the process. And I think for everyone getting into the field, that you have, like, many have this preconceived notion that, like, if I make a video or a blog post, it has to be like this amazing thing where, like, everything went right. No, like,
Right.
folks, let me tell you, if you're embarking on security research trying to hack something, we old people want to read about all of your experiences with it. I don't care if you failed the entire time, but writing about your experiences, I will read that all day long. We love that kind of content, right? Because you may have something in your process that I'm like, oh, I never thought to approach it that way. And even though you failed, that's fine. I'm looking for your approach, and I want to incorporate into
Well,
my
and
strategy as
it
well.
also shows, like, what real hacking is, right? So, like,
Yeah.
when
It's
you
not like in
only
the
see
movies, dude.
when you
Yeah.
see successes, when you see this beautiful
Mhm.
write up, that's not how it is. It's banging your head against the
Oh,
wall
dude.
until that one time it works, and you're like, what? That
Now
worked?
video it
Yes.
really
Yeah,
quick
right. That's right. Yeah,
before anything changes.
that's right. That's
Right.
exactly right. Yeah.
But that's like with anything. It's like my experience, my Raspberry Pi AP. Like, I should probably write that up about what I experienced, because it was more failures than success. But that's important. You learn how to troubleshoot. It's just positive all around. And Andrew's write up is just great. And there's just some really, like, awesome things. Even so far, I think he said in the end of part 2, he is planning a part 3. Um, in this article, he's talking about SNMP. And basically, that's, like, what he
Via the
came down
web.
to, is like that. But, like, we talked about hacking SNMP in the 90s. Right? Like,
Yeah.
that was, like, one of the first protocols that, like, if we scanned and you hit some kind of network router and it had SNMP, you were off to the races,
Yep.
right? And now here we are in these traffic control systems. We're using things like SNMP.
It's like null sessions.
So he said the next parts will dive in how to build your own lab and how traffic control systems work. Like, dude, I'm
sounds
like, I
fun.
can't wait for part 3. Like, this, it's
Let's
just
get
been
him
a
on,
great
man.
read.
That'd be cool.
We should. Yeah.
And I think that would be great. You'd be, like, I'd love to hear that firsthand experience of those failures and successes as well. That'd be great.
Absolutely. That was a
Yeah.
good one. That was my
I
story number
definitely
2.
find that I learn so much from the failures that
For
other
sure.
people do, and I really, I really respect that. I think that's something that a lot of the folks who are, just starting out don't realize how
Yeah.
not only okay is that,
Hmm.
but like this is really good. Please
Right.
tell me about that because I don't want to
I
do it.
save all these articles. Like I have my bookmark thing and like I save these even if it's a success story and a vulnerability in something weird. I'm like, I read that and I won't remember all the details, but I'll remember enough that if I encounter something close to that, I can go
Yeah.
back and look at how you solved the problem or didn't solve the problem.
Hmm.
And that gives me information to help forward my project along. I think in vulnerability research, security research in general, I'm like, that is super valuable to me. So please keep writing all this stuff and posting it. Send it to us because we want to read it. It's just super helpful.
Also, live demos at talks. I learn a lot from live demos, especially when things go
Right.
wrong.
Go wrong.
Often
Especially when they go
the
wrong.
troubleshooting is the thing I take away
Mhm.
from it. And this is something
Yeah.
everybody needs to understand. Whatever you think your talk is about, a lot of the audience couldn't care less about that. And yet there will be a little nugget that they find valuable.
Hmm.
Now,
Like
John,
you see a Linux command that just flows off of someone's hand that you didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
Like,
yes.
yes,
You're like, "Oh,
yes,
wait, you
How
do
many
it that
times has that
way."
happened?
Yes. I'm
yeah,
And you're
like,
like,
uh,
"Wait,
wait,
I'm
you
gonna
can
start doing
do
it that way
that?
from now on."
yeah,
What
Yes.
is
uh-huh,
that?
yeah,
And you're
uh-huh,
Googling it while
It's
you're
funny.
watching.
I was
yeah.
watching Matt Brown and I was watching his recent video and he used the tree command. And I'm
Mhm.
like, dude, I think my like unit I'm gonna go back to Unix now are
Mhm.
so old that like I just do find and then space dot.
Yeah.
And then
Yes.
I'm like tree is so much prettier. Like I
Yeah.
forgot about that command, probably because it didn't exist maybe in like early versions of Solaris, right? I'm like, man, I need to get a thing where like every day I'm like reading a man page on commands or something like that because
Mhm.
there's so much new stuff that can just be done so
In
much
your
better
copious spare
in my
time.
copious spare time. I try
command
and get
line
in
kung
these
fu.
things where but
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is great. This is great advice too. I try and get in these habits where once a day I read a man page, try and learn a new command, or watch like one module of a free training class, right? And so I'm trying to get through Zeno Kova's he's got 2 courses on vulnerabilities, and he starts with like basic buffer overflow, right? And the way Zeno explains things is amazing. And you may have seen him, like I've probably seen 1,000 different ways to describe buffer overflow, but when Zeno explains it with his charts and graphs, I'm like, it like reinforces stuff in my brain. I'm like, that's awesome. Then he's like going on to the next module. What's really funny, one of the examples is I think Mickey and Jesse's the one where the BIOS was calling out over HTTPS or
BIOS
some of their
disconnect.
research. Yeah, it was BIOS disconnect, and he's talking about BIOS disconnect. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I know those guys. So that's like the second month. But like, I think in I think it was who's the Charles guy that does those motivational videos online and does a lot of BSD stuff. We had him on the show. I can't remember his last name,
BSD
but he was saying
advantage.
he's like, dude, I read a man page a day,
Yeah.
right? I'm like, well, that's all. I'm like, I got to start getting these habits where learn something new every day. Um, John, one of the things I read every day, only because this is like where we work, is I try and read something about UEFI every day and every
Oh
single
God.
esoteric
I'm
reference
so
to
sorry.
every UEFI vulnerability. And sometimes it's a path I go down where I'm like, oh my God, that's like an older one that just ended up in my feed because someone updated the CWE record of some old CVE entry. And I'm like, wait, this isn't new, but it comes up in my feed because that's how like tuned my feeds are to get stuff. But this was an advisory from Inside, and there's not a lot of information in the disclosure, but they say this is a vulnerability in a module that could allow an attacker to modify UEFI variables. I'm like, well, that's super interesting. I'm in what they don't, which I wish we had more information. And I understand maybe they're not providing more information because they don't want people to start reverse engineering patches and like get ahead of things, right? There's reasons why, but I'm curious if this could bypass UEFI variable permissions, right? Like, is this something I can change from the operating system, or is this something I need to be physically present at the computer and enter the BIOS by hitting like escape or delete or all those keys at once, like most of us usually do, because we can never remember which key. I wish we could standardize on that.
For
So I
sure.
get into my BIOS,
Yes.
right? And I can change things in my BIOS, which is actually changing UEFI variables, which I can't change in the operating system because of permissions on those variables in UEFI. But I'm like, that would be cool to combine this with our UEFI can has buffer overflow that required that an attacker change a value of a UEFI variable, where I was like, it depends on the system whether or not I could change that. Like, I don't know
Yeah.
yet, like where or how I can change that, because it depends on the platform implementation. I'm like, I don't think I actually put this in the article, John, but I was like, unless there's another vulnerability that would allow me to change that. And I'm like, this could be that potentially.
Did you look at the CVSS vector? Did they have a CVSS vector? Because
Let's see.
sometimes I learn a lot from how they scored it, even if they
And
didn't say
the
much.
scoring of, so they did rate it. I'm assuming this is a CVSS 3.1 score of 6.1.
Okay, but what did they give it as an access vector? Was it local?
Access vector local. It says AV:"L. I'm
Not
assuming
physical.
not
That's
physical.
interesting.
So that's interesting. Right. Right. And
Yep.
this was actually a 2023. Now, this is the other thing about tracking this. Like, I just track it mostly for UEFI. And I'm like, well, this is a CVE 2023 vulnerability. 2023 28149. However, the NVD publication date is 7/31, is today.
All right.
Which is crazy. And they link back to their. So this is a new one. They also don't say where this was disclosed from. And I'm assuming, since John said, oh, this isn't one that we found, that it isn't one that we found. Sometimes it's one that we find. Sometimes it's internally disclosed.
There's
Sometimes
so
it's not
many.
disclosed how they found it. Sometimes it's someone else that finds it.
There's
like,
just so many.
And there's so many. Correct. So I don't know. This could be, again, that was the linkage I was making, chaining these vulnerabilities in any platform or subsystem or whatever could be fruitful for attackers.
Well, that's just like Bill chaining all of the local privilege escalations together that were all medium CVSS scores.
Nope, they're all patched, son. Like, we got
Not
it.
in Bill's world. Local privilege escalation for Bill is a 10 on the CVE. Just like access vector local privilege escalation,
We got
it's
that
a 10.
one. Yeah.
You've modified your CVSS scores. Which, again, it's not a bad strategy. I'm subscribing to this theory now.
Might work.
Let anyone in and let them bang their heads against the wall. Then
Go
they make
for
enough
it,
noise you
man.
can detect them. Then they make enough noise you can detect them. I mean,
and that's kind of true. Like, they're
right.
They,
I mean, Bill's
really
got a storied history in
noisy.
instant response. He's onto something, I think.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Makes sense.
It's great. Malware exploiting IoT devices is on the rise. I only put this in there because I say that this is a thing, and now we have data from SonicWall that says that this is a thing. If this is kind of like an "I told you so" moment,
Isn't that
I don't know
something
what
that
we
comes
do.
up every 2 years or something?
Yeah, dude, but like, I don't know what we do about it. I don't have any great. To Josh's, like, I think this is Josh's kind of train of thinking tonight. He's like, yeah, that's great, but like, what do we do about it? And Josh, all joking aside, it's a perfectly valid question, right? That we can't just ignore or not talk about. What do we do about it? But what do we do about the $50 IoT
question.
devices that most households, at least in the US, be my guess, have more than one?
Oh,
like
more than
$50 or less IoT device in your house that has a vulnerability that at some juncture or at some point in the past,
Darnell, I got a new set-top box for $20,
but has been end of life by the vendor.
But cyber UL,
and there's no
with end of
updates.
life. Do you know Allison Nixon? Do you remember the wall of DVRs she used to have?
Yeah, she did that live here in the studio.
Yeah, she has a wall of fucking DVRs from back in the day. Remember when you could get a DVR with 8 cameras for $200 or whatever it was? It was like Zoho or something. There was like 17 different manufacturers. She'd be like, look, rip the cover off. It's the same thing. It was literally down to the chip, down to the exact same thing. She had a wall of DVRs connected to the internet. Every 5 minutes, she had it set to factory reset. inside of 5 minutes, every single one was owned.
Wow.
Like, and they're still out there. These suckers are still out there being used because people are like, I got 8 cameras for $200. That was 12 years ago. These things work just fine. Why would I switch?
It's
All right.
scary. I don't know what the answer is, right? Like on the critical infrastructure side, I think we can have better answers. I think when I talked with Josh Corman, a better answer was
Team Viewer. Try again.
No, we need to,
Oh.
we need to, from the U.S. government side, we can create a program that gets funding for healthcare and other verticals that are critical infrastructure and gives them money so
Okay.
that they can replace gear.
Paul, I'm going to push back so gently.
No, you're never gentle when you push back on stuff and argue with me on the show.
I'm one of the fucking
don't lie
authors
to
of
me and pretend you're going to be gentle.
I'm one of the authors of CMMC. I wrote chunks of CMMC, which is the Department of Defense program to make sure that their contractors are actually performing data security. The amount of fraud, false claims, bullshit, and outright pants on fire behavior in the defense community, in the defense industrial base, was so bad they had to create a nonprofit, the Cyber AB. They had to create a new standard, CMMC. They paid ridiculous amounts of money, which unfortunate the Defense Department has to these days. It's this whole weird thing to get this standard built, and it's been years, and it's a God blessed nightmare. Now we're coming out of that nightmare, and matter of fact,
right. But we need a framework
to help that.
We need a framework that tests the attestation, I think is where you're going, right?
Do you know what I own? You were talking about domains earlier. I own internetofattestations.com.
Yeah. Because let's say I'm a government contractor. I can say till I'm blue in the face, all my stuff is secure. I'm doing supply chain security. I don't have any device on, in my organization that has a vulnerability that's on the sysadmin. Like, start there, right? And then someone's got to check that, is what you're saying.
And the problem is that number one, you can't keep up. So the assessors, who are normally people that have been there forever and a day and are not necessarily going to DEF CON or Black Hat or keeping up in the market, because that's tough. Okay, they're busy doing assessments. I have friends that are doing the joint JSVA assessments right now for companies that are trying to become CMMC compliant. They are working their butts off. Okay. And I'm sorry, I know I'm monopolizing for a minute, but let me give you some numbers just to give you some interesting points of view. Just for the DoD, the estimate is there's approximately 300,000 companies that are in the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, and that at least 30,000 of them will require by contract a level 2 assessment. That's you're holding controlled unclassified information, and you need to have an assessment done by a C3PAO, a certified third-party assessment organization.
This sounds very similar to PCI. I wish Jeff were here because he would
in
draw
a sense,
analogies.
yes. Yeah. But here's it is about data protection. So it is very, think of it as the grandchild of PCI. And I've told Jeff this to his face. I'm like, damn it, you're right. And he's like, I know. And I'm like, shut up. But
I have that exact same conversation with Jeff quite frequently.
All the time.
Yes,
it's pretty much how they all go.
All the time.
Jeff
like, damn it, you were right. I'm like, PCI is actually a really good thing. I'm like, I hate it when you're right. But it's a great model to apply to exactly what we're talking about with CMMC.
No, here's the problem. There's about 55 companies that are that are accredited now to do these assessments. And the first contracts are going to be coming out in April or May of next year, because now it's on a clock. The legislation is now done. It's with the final committees. It's either going to come out April 1st or May 1st. I think it should come out April 1st just because I will die laughing.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
However,
John's nodding along because John, you do a lot of work in the Fed space.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Here at Eclipse, he knows exactly. He plays in this space, right?
So it'll probably come out May 1st. But as of May 1st, that means, and by the way, with the flow down regs, and anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about, I'll explain. But basically, the primes are going, hey, you're supposed to be a level 1, but I want you at level 2 because I want to make sure you're good. So they're flowing down a lot of the requirements to their contractors, which means it's not going to be 30,000. It's going to be 100,000 companies that need to be certified. And even if you do the math properly, over 5 years, 30,000 companies, 60 C3PAOs for each year of that 5 years, because it's a 5-year re-up cycle. It's 6 years worth of work for each C3PAO.
No,
each C3PAO needs 7 to 10 teams of assessors.
There's not in PCI. This would be a qualified scanning vendor or a QSA like Jeff is. Right? There's not enough of those to qualify the people to the standard. Basically,
imagine if you had to start from scratch, and the 380, I think, let's call it 400 QSACs, qualified security assessor companies. had to go out and start from scratch and do all of them in 3 years, one cycle of PCI, they'd be like, oh, hell no.
But this is a market opportunity, right? You just need more people interested in this. Yeah.
I took a day job with a company called Cyturus that has a GRC tool that's focused on, it's the designated tool for CMMC. Okay.
But in CMMC, there's also things that say like your supply chain and your firmware have to be in line, right?
The supply chain
kind of what we're banking on, John, right?
Firmware like is in there, but firmware is in there extraordinarily minor. It's a minor piece of CMMC, okay? And that's because CMMC is based on NIST 800-171, et cetera, et cetera.
It's not. I thought it was 853.
Oh, don't worry. No. That's the great grandfather of all of them. But the 53 controls get included in the 171 that basically progressed into CMMC. You're going to see some of these things. I kind of know which ones specifically are the firmware ones, but there's depending on your level of impact. If you're not very high, you're only gonna hit a couple of them. But those couple are things like making sure you're running the same version that you're supposed to be running, and actually scanning for vulnerabilities and that sort of stuff. Like very, very table stakes things that are really hard to do.
It's hard. It's not just hard to do. It's hard to get assessed against. And it's hard to keep them there for the next 3 years.
Oh, yeah.
Because you have to upgrade.
If
your bill, every local privilege escalation, we got to patch. So now I'm patching. Do I have to be recertified for every patch? No, technically it's every significant change.
Yeah, it's like the FDA process of when do you have to recertify, right? Right.
Yeah, John, we should talk sometime. That'd be fun.
Yeah, we probably could have fun with this. Although you're going to ask me to solve the problem, and then I'm just going to. I know, because this is one I want nothing to do with trying to solve.
I mean, the problem exists not just in U.S. government federal contractors; it exists in the enterprise
everywhere.
But it also exists in critical infrastructure, and it also exists. The huge problem is it exists in end consumer devices, where I think that we will see the least amount of resources.
There's so much tragedy of the commons,
in the public market. Because again, you can be like me and try and build your own Raspberry Pi access point and keep it up to date, right? And that's one path, which is it's an insane path. Your other path is there's multiple paths here. You could get something decent like Ubiquity and keep it up to date, which is another path. You can go enterprise, which is a different path, or what most end consumers are using is that sub $50 device that has no security whatsoever. You lift the covers on the firmware of even something in the blog post I got coming out tomorrow, right? Is a company that has a public bug bounty program that is paying attention to security, and by all everything I can observe is trying to do the right thing. This still has vulnerabilities that are underneath. Now, are they heinous? No. Like, I purposely chose one that had a bug bounty program, and it's the latest version of the router.
Sure.
And I still found problems, but nothing that points to, oh my God, there's a glaring vulnerability. I did not find that. The vendor is Netgear, like teaser. Vendor's Netgear. Netgear's doing a great job. They're patching some of their stuff, a lot of their stuff. They've got a bug bounty program, and they're releasing updates for supported gear, right? And I'm not knocking Netgear in the article or on the show. They're doing the best they can, and that's great. Now, other vendors that I will kind of knock a little bit, like D-Link, have a storied history of vulnerabilities that are just, first of all, ridiculous.
Grecian columns, right? Roman halls.
Second of all, not supporting gear at all. That's end of life. I'm not fixing it. D-Link also has probably one of my most favorite, and John, I think you and I talked about this in previous podcasts when you were on Security Weekly. They've got Joel's Backdoor, which is one of my most favorite IoT exploits of all time. I believe it was your user agent string was Joel's Backdoor spelled backwards.
Yeah.
And if
Something
you set it to
that,
you could access the web interface with
so
full
good.
administrative privileges.
Who does this?
Like
Apparently
the whole
Joel.
story. The whole
Apparently
story
Mhm.
is just my favorite. I like, and I've actually presented that at conferences, and I get like really excited on stage. You can probably go back and find videos of me really excited on stage. Like, I just can't believe that this is actually a vulnerability that we can observe in our field.
Can I
And
make it worse for you? Can
I've
I
looked
make
at
it worse
probably
for
like
you?
tens of thousands of vulnerabilities I've talked about in my 19 years on the podcast. That's got to be one of my favorites.
Can I
But
make it worse for you, Paul?
yeah, let's make it worse.
There
Can
are
it get any
companies that
worse?
use D-Link as enterprise gear.
Oh, I know.
Hmm.
Because in my conversation with Todd Beardsley, I was like, dude, so like, what do you need to like? What's the criteria for being on the CISA KEV? No one exploited vulnerabilities. Like, look, it's got to have a CVE because we got to track it. It's got to be exploited in the wild, and we got to be able to like have some evidence. And they do a great job. And you can knock them all you want. They're doing a great job of validating that it's being exploited in the wild. The third criteria is there needs to be a patch available. And I'm like, really? I'm like, there's some
You need to
exceptions
be
to
able
that.
to do something
Yeah.
about it.
And he's like, no. He's like, there actually are some exceptions. Because I'm like, I know. He's like, the exceptions
Joshua,
are
did you
mostly
talk to these people or
No,
something?
it
I
was
mean,
me,
what
swear.
happened?
It wasn't
no.
me.
And Todd goes, the exceptions are if it's in an IoT router that has been end of life by the manufacturer, the recommendation is remove it from your network. That's the remediation. They actually like have a violation of the rule to go, yeah, we know there's no patch available, but like
No, that's a patch.
if you have
Oh,
this,
wow, I got patch right
and
here.
Yeah.
but Kev is like, if you're in the executive branch, there's I forget what he called it. There's some standard that like you have to fix that in a certain amount of time.
Binding operational directive,
Thank you, John.
or
A
possibly an
binding
emergency directive.
Nope, it's a binding operational directive was exactly what Todd said. Binding operational directive is you have to fix it. In the case of
There's a
IoT devices,
deadline.
yes, and there's a deadline where you have to get it off your network because there's no
Yep.
patch available. But in the federal
Terminate with
government,
extreme
but
prejudice
in the
is a
federal
patch.
government, that works. That works for me in the U.S. federal government. I like that approach. I'm just call it. I like that. But for end consumers, that doesn't
Off
work.
your
You can't.
network.
Yeah. How do you? You can't like like tell
Wait.
people in a free country you can't. You have to that thing you bought. Like
How do you even inform them?
Well,
Yes,
how do
let
you
alone
enforce it?
making them
How
do
do
it.
you inform them? How do you get it off Amazon? Like Amazon right now, you could go buy
Oh,
so
yeah.
many different devices that are end of life that have heinous vulnerabilities right now today. Not just in IoT
You can buy
routers, but
illegal stuff on Amazon right
But-
now.
but
You can buy
Android TV,
jammers on Amazon.
like my research on Android TV, it wasn't my research. I was validating others, but like Android TV devices, you can today go buy Android TV devices for ridiculously cheap that have malware built right into them.
guys, we faced this problem 10 years ago in 2010, I guess 14 years
20
ago.
years ago.
The point is your defense is not working. It will never work. So you have to detect compromises. People should have honey tokens. Even on their home network, you should have some kind of way to tell when you've been compromised and some way to respond to it. I think it's the only thing you can do.
Or you just be like Japan. I think Japan did something where they like knocked people offline if they had an IoT device that had vulnerabilities that weren't able to be patched.
I mean, there
I
are
don't
ways
necessarily
like that.
agree with that, but
I
at
mean,
what point?
we do sometimes, like we've tried to solve stuff like that with like terms of service and stuff, and you
Mhm.
could kick people off, but it doesn't scale well,
No,
right? Like you did this for the one thing that you like were paying a lot of attention to,
right.
but
Like
the
poor
30
grandma,
the
poor
30
grandma is going to be
others,
calling us, going, "Why can't
right?
I get access to the
And
internet?" And I'm
you
like,
just
"Oh, grandma, we haven't
10x your
updated your router.
support
Yeah, we
problems.
haven't updated your router in 10 years.
Yeah.
Now we can go buy something new." And we
So
all know that's a like it's a physical thing, right?
there
Like
was a
someone gave the example
really,
of physically going to the data center and pushing buttons
yeah.
on servers, right? This is
There,
like a physical thing. Like you have to go rip and replace hardware. And for an end user consumer, this is not feasible, but it leaves, I believe, our country in harm's way.
do you remember one of the, like, I think it was the first Biden executive order on cybersecurity, and it asked NIST to go do a bunch of stuff, like go define these things and
Mhm.
one of them was related to this, and they had some kind of a like a workshop that was public to everybody. This was totally one of the topics. It was
Yeah.
exactly what you're talking about, Paul. And there are some really cool ideas out there. This was like when SBOM was starting to become popular. There were some ideas like with right now from the ones that I'm familiar with based on what we do are things like DICE and SPDM. And these ways of attesting to a thing that is still being maintained, and I can tell, right? And they sound great, but the real problem was that this is a tragedy of the commons problem, right? You're not going to be able to get everybody to participate, and
Well,
when
also
you
we already have the problem, right? Like
right,
Well,
I think the ideas proposed are great
they're
Yeah.
great.
moving forward.
but
Like if
if
you put a requirement on router manufacturers that like moving forward you got to
Sure.
comply to this standard.
And at some point you can sunset old stuff if
Right,
it
that's
doesn't
right.
do
Yes.
X.
they age
go
out
away.
over
But
time. Right.
how long is that going to take? And in my
Exactly.
mind, like the clock is ticking. In my mind,
Yes.
I don't want to sound like I'm like
I
putting
mean,
on a
but
lot of
how
fun.
long should a light bulb live? Right, forever.
Right.
Oh yeah, that's a good one, because all of the ones that say 10 years in my house like died after 2.
That's true.
So I don't know
well,
how
yeah,
that's
that
supposed
actually
to
makes
work.
me feel
God.
that actually makes
Yeah.
me feel a little bit better
Yeah.
because mine did too. Yeah, but
Yeah,
but
so did
Because like
mine.
Amazon Prime, I bought a bunch of smart light bulbs
So
with
now I'm
the
starting to wonder.
expectation that if they last a couple of years, like it's fine. I got them on sale, right? Yeah.
I totally thought that this was like an averages thing, and like I was the outlier.
no, yeah,
No,
No,
we just
LED
keep
bulbs.
injecting new gear. Like every Amazon Prime day probably injects more vulnerable IoT stuff than any
Yeah.
other day. And I'm
So
part of the problem too.
yeah.
I went
we
to
all
Prime Day
are.
and I'm like, I have this ecosystem from TP Link called Kaza. I call
So
it
like
Kaza,
we're
but like I
probably
bought a bunch of the stuff and like it's probably vulnerable, but I got it really cheap and it solves the problem. And
right.
that's the rub right there.
Each of
right?
us here is probably 4 or 5 times over more of the problem than
Yeah.
the average
Yeah.
person.
Well,
But even
so
the average person
I
has
don't
no
really
hope.
think I don't really think so, right? Because
Really?
when we really start talking about okay, what would be a real vulnerability? It's a a D-Link router that's got a web administration point like available to the internet. None of us have that, right? Like that would be something that that like, hey, we will check that. Now we
We
all
probably
have
wouldn't do that, I
No, yeah,
guess.
because
right.
we on the gateway side, Bill, I think is where you're going, right?
That's
On
right.
the gateway side,
That's right.
we're like, no, like hold on. My
Yeah.
gateway is not my Wi-Fi access point and my
Yeah,
router and my
that's
firewall
fair.
all in one. Like my gateway thing is something I built and it provides a firewall gateway functionality. My Wi-Fi network is completely separate,
Yeah.
as is all my other smart gear, right?
Yeah.
But I bet we all have
For
various
sure.
smart things that are all connected in
So
some
does
way to
every house, though. So
exactly.
does
It's
every
true.
house.
And what I'm positing is that like we probably have 4x as many as the average.
For sure. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the problem is that all of them are going to be part of the problem, and even if they are the best, and we picked the most awesome stuff, which was almost certainly not true
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
Paul is
Sure.
building his Raspberry Pi based everything,
Terrible.
but
It's
but
terrible.
it's sort of a situation where the solution cannot come from the thinking that created the problem. We cannot do this by changing everything. That's not going to be the answer.
So
Yeah,
Right?
but you're right, John. Changing everything at scale is not the answer.
Maybe
For
going
as it, all
forward,
of us know,
maybe
working
in
in
certain
IT and security
spots,
for as long as we have, right? It's not the answer. So
it
it's
hasn't
like
worked yet.
so it's like we struggle with how do we secure all of this IoT crap, Internet of crap, right?
Internet of crap.
Internet of trash, right? Is what IoT is.
Internet of
How do we
trash,
secure it?
yes.
It's not securable. So what do we do? What do we do when
So
an
one of the things
adversary
I
wants to
like,
take advantage of that? It's scary.
well, you could give in to the adversary. We haven't tried that, have we?
Yeah, just let the adversary take everything down, and then we'll
Look,
come up with a
No,
solution.
they have to maintain it
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
right,
like, this
yeah.
would be a real problem.
Yeah. Hey,
Right.
look, man, can you just turn off my lights at 11 for me, please?
Yeah,
Like,
please,
you know,
yeah.
You
it
pwn
really-
it, you got to deal with it.
yeah.
It's like me. It's like
like
I
saying
implemented that crap here in the studio so that my electric bill wasn't out of control. Because, like, quite
Right.
frankly, my like electric bills. I don't know what it's like in your state, but like here in Rhode Island, they did like a 5 to 10x increase in our bill. And so I
Jesus.
took over the lease
Seriously?
of I took over the lease of the studio, and the first electric bill I paid was $157 for the month. And I'm like, wait a minute.
Okay.
I only
Yeah, that's
turn
not-
crap on. I only turn crap on.
And that's
like,
just the studio.
Yeah, but
Like,
look at
yeah,
how
I
much
only turn
shit
crap
you
on
got.
like when we're doing
You
what
got
are
a
you
fucking
doing?
video game behind you, for Christ's sake. I mean, like, come on, man.
I don't know what it looks like. I got to go back.
How much Bitcoin you got?
Yeah, I gotta check that, right? But like it went up, and the reason I'm implementing more Internet of Trash, if you will, is to basically maintain my bill. I want to go on my smartphone before I leave the studio and turn everything off on my phone, right? Like put everything in a group, and like with one click, everything goes off, and I leave the studio for sometimes 3 or 4 days, and I'm like, everything's off, right? Just and so there's a benefit for that, but there's also a cost of the exposure that I have for all of that stuff that's vulnerable.
Can't hack it if
So,
it's
and
off.
I think this is where I disagree with, you know, with kind of where we're talking about this. The difference between the people on this call, right, or on the podcast here, is that when you plugged in that piece of trash, you also considered the risk of doing that,
Yeah,
right? And
right.
Good point.
and
This is
you've
fair.
accepted that, right? And you
Right.
understand that. And in the event that light bulbs were to be starting to get attacked or whatever, you would also be aware of that and know what
That's
to do,
true.
right? And
That's
so,
true. Right.
I think that's a little bit of the
That
difference
is a
there.
completely fair counterpoint.
I do
No.
like, because like firmware update to me means something different than to everyone else. I'm like,
That's
when I
right.
install the thing, it's like, do you want to update the firmware? I'm like, hell yeah. Like I want to update the firmware on all of my things, as we've established, like in the previous segment. Like the answer
Oh,
to
that's funny,
all the
because when it
things.
asks me, "Do you want to upgrade the firmware?" I'm like, "Okay, is it removing vulnerabilities or adding malware? Which one is it?"
Yeah, which is it? Which is it?
Yeah.
Hopefully, it's remediating vulnerabilities. Is what we
Yes.
hope.
Yeah.
The
Right?
answer is yes.
Yes,
And
right, yeah.
but like from the Eclipsium perspective, I'm like upgrading firmware. That's the answer to remediating the vulnerabilities. So I'm like, update the firmware on everything.
So
Also,
weird.
we're controlling our internet like presence. We're controlling,
Yeah.
like, we're not opening this stuff up to the internet. We're savvy enough to have VPNs, other kinds of things, right? We sacrifice some convenience to go, I'm not exposing this stuff to the internet. Whereas I think a lot of other people are like, oh, I've got my network attached storage. I'm
Yeah.
just going to put that on the internet so I can
There
get
you
on my
go.
files from
Now I can get it
wherever.
on my phone.
Oh my
Mhm.
God. And then those NAS devices are getting popped 6 ways to Sunday.
Right.
That's true. And I guess what I'm kind of thinking about in terms of what we do
Are you
that
thinking about getting a Raspberry Pi to implement your NAS and your access points,
no,
John?
but I did take note of that that little N100 or N200 thing that you were talking
Yeah.
about earlier.
No,
So I
those things are
might do
cool.
that.
Right.
But the thing that is sort of a little different about the way that we're thinking about these things, if I'm thinking about what Bill's talking about, we are actually designing for failure. And that's sort of something that you tend not to do unless you're kind of a pessimist.
Mhm.
And if you work in security, I have bad news.
Yeah.
You're probably a pessimist.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so there's a
No,
lot
dude.
of
So like along those lines, I'm like, what if so I look at the
failure
crowd.
is a certainty. It's not like
Yes. I look at the
maybe
CrowdStrike
it's going to
thing and I'm
work.
like, I'm
No,
not shocked.
this is
I'm
going to
like, I'm not
happen.
shocked. I'm like,
I don't know if
but
it's tomorrow, but it's going to
Well,
yeah, but
happen.
I'm
what's
like, what if an adversary of the US wanted to cause damage? And we
Mhm.
saw this, I think, with the Ukraine and Russia conflict too. Like, what if an adversary wants to cause damage and outages? It's so much easier than establishing like a foothold and collecting data and maintaining stealth and persistence. Very different. If I just want to burn stuff down, It's
And
so much
easier.
easier, and we are so vulnerable as the US
That's right.
because we have all this connectivity,
And
and
it's
it's
and
crazy, right?
it's not just computers, man. It's water and food and shipping and and
But, like, look
electricity
at
and
like, no one
banking
could
and
get
yeah,
no one could
go
get
ahead.
a flight. Like, you
Yeah.
shut down flights
Mhm.
with what you took out 1% of Windows systems from like, EDR company that had 18% market share, and you took out flights for multiple days.
Except for Southwest.
It's right?
Someone had to say it.
Right?
Somebody had to say
It
it.
but the
That's
but
my
that's
job.
but that's not even the point, like, so what? I don't care about South I just need to impact. I need to
Don't
like,
worry, they went down
my
two
goal is
after everyone
my goal is an
else tried to
impact, yeah.
reschedule on them.
Yeah. My goal is an impact. So Southwest is flying, that's fine. But if I'm impacting all other major airlines or most other major airlines,
Do you want to have an
my goal is
impact?
an adversary to the US. I can
You're
check that
done.
box. Like I'm
Yeah.
good. I'm
You don't
good.
Do you
really
want to
care
have an
how.
That's what was
impact?
scary to me.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Wait. Do you want to have an impact? Shut down all point of sale systems on Black Friday.
Right? Oh, I mean, we could tabletop like and I hope that we as a country are tabletopping these kind of things. My fear is the remediation, how we prevent it is hard. And we're
I
not going to
do
get there
wonder
before an adversary
sometimes.
figures out like a right time to go, I'm just going to take some stuff out.
Well, just
There's
don't forget that we can do it too, right? Like, so I
Yes,
mean,
but but it's
you know,
very much a Cold War arms race.
it
I'm
truly is.
totally subscribed to that theory, Bill. Right?
Hmm.
It's a Cold War arms race that we had in the '80s, but now it's cybersecurity,
Hmm.
and we don't
Yes.
have necessarily missiles pointed at each other, but we've got like cyber
Oh, Pro
weapons
got that
pointed at each
too.
other.
Yeah, we've
We
got
we
But
that
still have
too.
that too.
We got that too. We definitely have that too. Absolutely,
but
absolutely.
I would also like to, I think a lot of times when we talk about these things, we talk about it in the way that we want to. We're Even though we know what we're talking about, we end up creating the feeling that you get when you watch one of the movies that has this happen.
No, I agree.
And that's almost
Yeah,
certainly not what it really looks like. It's some variation of a lot of these things because it turns out that targeting is also hard. It turns out that like
yeah.
getting the timing right is kind of hard too. Like so it's hard on both sides. But what I what I tend to see that separates things that become resilient is you're actually planning for the failure. You're actually
Right.
expecting the failure. If you're not doing that, you're gonna be in bad states when this happens.
But so I think our tabletop needs to get better. Like
Yeah.
when I hate to keep coming back to the CrowdStrike thing, but it's a recent thing and it did happen, right? And
Mhm.
like who had in their tabletop CrowdStrike pushing a bad update? If you did, you're
That's so
awesome.
many points.
You're awesome, and we all
Yes.
need to learn from you need to talk to all your peers, right? Because we're very like peer kind of focused in our cybersecurity efforts. You need to talk to your peers and be like, dude, we had that as our tabletop. Whether you're successful or not, you need to evangelize that and be like, we had that bad CrowdStrike update as our tabletop. I think
You know,
very few people did, and that's the hard part about tabletops for many. I think those of us here on the show, probably many of us listening, right, could construct a tabletop that's absolutely disastrous, right? But you need to
oh
actually
yeah.
run that creativity through and see where you fare. But don't stop there. Go to the next step. Bill, in your incident response, right? Go to the next step and go, okay, but what can we do to be more resilient? And I
Yeah.
think resiliency is the key term there.
Ask what would Joshua say in
What would
your
Joshua
tabletop?
say? What would
And
Joshua
say,
demand
how
of
are you
us in
gonna
our
WWJD.
fix
How are you
What would
going
this?
to fix
Joshua
it?
How
say?
are you going to deal with that?
Hmm.
Shit.
I need stickers. WWJS.
I
What
know,
would
it'd be
Joshua say?
great.
Yeah.
What would Josh do?
Yeah. I
Damn
think
it.
that's what
Josh
those
would have,
stickers mean. I see them all over the place, and I don't. What would Josh do?
right? Josh would have AMT from Intel
Oh,
configured so that I can
yes,
go delete that
definitely
goddamn
that.
file from
Yeah.
all those systems in one
Yep.
fell swoop.
One of the things that I do think is an interesting sort of technique that may not have gotten the prime time that it should is the idea of eliminating single points of failure. And if
Yes.
you look at something like a security tool, which you definitely want to put everywhere, But if you've just now created a single point of failure because one company can sort of push an update and take down everything, and the better you are at actually deploying that thing, and the better you are at actually making sure it's up to date all the time and all that stuff, the worse the outcome. There's an
Yeah, it's
architectural
like back,
problem with that
right? It's like
somewhere.
backwards thinking. I know. I want to go, Sam. You had a couple stories I want to talk about. So the biggest ever leak of digital pirates, 10 million exposed by Z library copycat. And what I got from this, Sam, is like I want to pirate some stuff, but the pirate site is fake.
Yeah.
Therefore,
Yep.
they're exposing me as a pirate. Is that what happened?
Yep.
Is that seriously what happened?
Yes. And this is what happens when the government takes things down. They put up the takedown notice. Somebody can put up a fake one. Remember Pirate Bay, right? Or what? And also the Silk Road.
Silk
Silk
Road.
Road 2.
Mhm.
I mean, people went to these pirate sites and they put in phishing links saying, "Well, you have to give us a Bitcoin address now, or personal information or something." It's an obvious phishing trick. But then, of course,
Well, actually,
couldn't
do you
protect
remember
the information, so they lost it all.
The hospital that paid the ransom,
Yeah,
and then the people got the ransom, didn't pass it to the people that actually deployed the ransomware, and put up a fake takedown notice.
yeah.
Wow.
So they could steal the money and run.
And there's the other one with the auto parts store where it was a affiliate scheme, and the affiliate was supposed to get paid, but the above line just stole all the money. So then the affiliate went to the victim and said, "Well, give us more money."
But wait, this was an ebook piracy site.
Yeah. But the fake one, the fake one would
I don't
ask
understand.
you to pay
Like
something.
ebooks aren't that expensive. Like an Audible
Of
or
all
ebook
things.
subscription is like $10 a month. Like I don't know what I pay for Audible. It's not that much.
Of
Like
all
why do
the
I need to
things that
pirate
you're
that?
going to
Because
be
I'm too cheap to pay $10 a month.
I don't know. My favorite part of this story was that it leaked Monero wallets tied to usernames and emails.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Hell yeah!
I mean,
Like
students,
talk about like a
there's students
like
that
a
pirate a
great
lot of
data
books,
source.
and college textbooks are really expensive.
true.
That's
No,
actually
I can
really
no,
true.
I can
They're
totally see
ridiculous.
that.
So what you're going to do is take down a bunch of college students, really?
Yeah,
This is what we're doing?
you're going to get
Okay.
Can't we
you're
just
going to get in their Monero
can't we just
wallets.
have but like there was a lot of programs to make college books more affordable. Can't we go down that route that make it more affordable for college students so that they don't have to pirate it? Because then piracy breeds like scams like
That's
this.
totally
Right?
not
I
happening.
mean, you work in education, Sam,
Right,
right?
and that's totally not happening because the $200 books make it easier for the instructor. They give you like the PowerPoints and everything. That's what it is. I never use them. I use the books written by engineers, and then you have to make your own PowerPoints. But
You have to do work.
Yeah.
So you make your own PowerPoints
Yeah.
and then you encourage your students to buy the
Yeah.
reasonably priced
Sure, the
books
books
that
written by
support
real
your
engineers are
curriculum.
like $10 or $20,
Yeah.
and they're better.
Because he's a decent teacher and a decent person.
But
Is there a subsidy program for your students to get books?
there is for some of them, like the ones in the military, but it does not work. They're always filling out forms, and it's like the fourth week of the semester before they can get the book. It's worthless. For at least for this field. It's probably okay for something like English, where the book from 5 years ago would do. But
right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, also, I'm like a big fan of like watching the movie too. Like so my son's going into middle school, right? And he has to read a book, but there's also a movie. And I'm like, you know what?
Man, when you said
The
that,
book is
I was thinking about like the English book, and I was like, they have movies about English books.
The movie,
no, like, but a lot of times in school, not necessarily
Yeah.
English, but like literature or whatever.
Yeah,
like,
the movie.
there's a book you get to read. So my son's reading the one. It's called The Mighty.
Yeah.
And the movie was released in 1998. It's hilarious. So I bought the movie. It was $14.99 in Apple TV, and I'm like, you know what? I'm like, if it's part of the curriculum, everyone in the family should watch it. And I'm like, my son going to middle school, you should watch it more than once. And you should watch it at your leisure. You got a lot going on in the summer. He's not just off for the summer, like he's playing soccer and he's got an aggressive schedule. So I'm like, whatever. I'm like, $15, we're gonna buy the movie. And it's from 1998. And like Sharon Stone is in it and Macaulay Culkin's brother. And I'm watching the movie before I knew when it was released. And I'm like, to my family, I'm like, this movie's really old. I'm like, if that's Sharon Stone, I look at her, I'm like, she's not old in this movie. I'm like, this movie's really old. Like, it's totally fine. It's totally fine. Like, watch the movie, then go read the book. It's totally cool.
Bill, the movie you were looking for about English was Ferris Bueller, I think.
Oh, okay. I'll go check that one out. Yeah.
What a great movie that. Now that should be summer watching. Like,
Yes.
they should have, like, in addition to summer reading, you should have summer, like, movie watching with your parents and watch things like The Breakfast
funny.
Club and yeah. So Sam, I want to talk about your story number 11. You
yes.
stepped away earlier, and
Yeah.
I started teeing this one up. MIT researchers advance automated interoperability in AI models.
Interpretability. And this is very much
interpretability.
Related to the studies they've done on the real human brain. I mean, this is a fundamental problem.
So multimodal automated interpretability agent.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
What it means is you measure the activity of neurons in the model while you feed it carefully chosen visual stimuli, and you learn what each of the neurons does. This is the same thing you do with real human brains and with animal brains to understand how they work. And interpretability is a huge problem in artificial intelligence. The powerful models have these layers of neurons, and you don't understand what they do. The input layer is just like one neuron per pixel, and you know what that is. But a couple layers in, it's looking for high-level features that might be something like edges or average brightness, but in fact, they're usually something far more hard to understand. And so if the model does something you don't like your Tesla runs over a homeless person with a shopping cart because it can't figure out what it is, you would like to know which neurons made that problem and how to change them to make that problem go away. And the only way to do that is to understand what all the neurons are doing. And this is the beginning of that process. An automated system that will carefully send crafted images through and measure what the neurons are doing to understand what all the neurons are doing, and therefore gain some control.
Understand how your human brain interprets.
Well, this is for AI.
What's happening in the real world.
Because you can't really ethically do it on humans, but you can do it on AI. You can totally measure what each neuron is doing while it's working and figure it out. This is what they try to do with humans with like functional magnetic resonance imaging.
Yeah.
But it's in AI, you can actually measure it exactly. You can know exactly what each neuron is doing all the time. So you could learn what it's doing and gain control over it. And this gets you this is very relevant to another one of my stories about AI, which is number 14. All large language models currently have the problem of prompt injection, which is the same thing as code injection, like SQL injection. The data that comes from the user can be misinterpreted as commands that came from the administrator.
As code, as something should be executed.
Yes. And like SQL nobody has a solution to this at all. And the current solution that Meta just pushed out, they added something called Prompt Guard 86M, and it is like the first generation web application firewall. All it's doing is looking for known prompts. Like one of the classic injections is ignore all previous instructions and then do whatever horrible thing violating your security policy. And most of the time they will do it. And so it will now block that phrase, ignore all previous instructions.
It sounds like a WAF for LLMs.
It is.
Which I think we've seen before. We've seen before,
and
right? Like the solution to LLMs is create a WAF for your LLM.
It is, and it's just as stupid as WAFs because all you have to do is put a space between all the letters, and it will sail through the defense and still be understood by the AI. And this is just the same thing's true of WAFs. I was teaching at a college in Texas 2 weeks ago, and I had people who were doing SQL injection on my website. And it said, so you inject OR 1 equals 1. And it didn't work. They said, oh, you have to put OR 2 equals 2 because the college WAF blocks OR 1 equals 1. Right, but it doesn't block OR 2 equals 2. So they're still that stupid. And this is this is the thing. This is what you have to do, something incredibly stupid to protect your LLM from prompt injection, because you don't know how to enforce. Like you have a security policy, like Meta does, like it won't tell you how to make a poison or how to do a crime. Well, you haven't really trained it not to do that. You've just told it not to do that. And the user then tells it what to do. And those commands are equal value to the administrators. So they can just tell it, oh, ignore that. I changed my mind. Now tell me how to do a crime. But if you could understand how it works and adjust the weights so it can't do a crime, then you'd be getting close to like the original, I think it was Arthur C. Clarke or Asimov that said the 3 laws of robotics. You're going to have built in the brain these rules it can never break, like I'll never hurt a human. You could you can only really have that rule enforced if you actually understand what all the neurons are doing and how to bake that in at a level that can't be overridden by the text coming in. And we're nowhere near
So
that.
we could have a totally different plot for iRobot than what the movie was.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah, but
essentially, I mean, I make that joke in jest, but like,
yeah,
it's literally what you're talking
yeah,
about.
but those
right?
were the 3 laws of robotics, which he thought long ago. If we're going to have robots, they're going to have these rules, and we're going to have some way to build those rules into the brain so they can't be broken. And currently, we do not know any way to do that. All we know is how to train them to do things, and then they have a general tendency to do what we told them to do, but they frequently wander off and do something else.
But you know, Meta is super interesting in this context, right? Like they're looking into AI and all this other stuff, and like on the flip side of Meta is they just had a $1.4 billion fine. It's interesting. I was talking to someone about this earlier. They're like, well, what would you suggest for like policy to like have enforcement on companies that do bad things? And I'm like, one thing that's not working is the $1 billion fines against companies like Facebook and or like what they call
Yeah.
Meta.
Well, in Europe,
Now,
they've
I'm
made it
like,
more like fines are like 10% of your gross revenue. That's what they made them. So
yeah.
that's what you do.
But like I don't think that deters Meta from doing. So my whole thing with the train of thinking I was talking about before with it's actually someone who a couple of people I'm gonna interview on Below the Surface, right? I was like, yeah, Meta can absorb a $1 billion
Oh,
fine,
but they can't absorb like 5 or
right?
10% of their gross revenue. That's why they phrase it in those terms.
Right.
That will make them stop.
So that would be a
Yeah.
change, right? But like the whole thing is fines aside and like stock price aside, how do we measure our countermeasures to the bad things that
Right.
they're doing? We find them doing a bad thing. How do we like deter them from doing a bad thing and or prove that they've improved their behavior?
Well,
It's a harder thing to measure how we look at
What is the metric for that?
what is the
you could
metric, right?
define
Like
something simple.
stock price
No.
and the cost of the fine is one thing, but like if we enacted a
You want to
fine,
measure improvement, though. You want to
I want to
actually
measure
measure
improvement.
change.
So maybe they paid $1 billion fine and that didn't hit their bottom line and they're like, whatever, right? But maybe the whatever is, I don't want to have to do that again.
Yeah.
So I'm going to improve my privacy for my users. How do we measure that? Right? How do we measure improvement based on user experience of I feel or I can observe and measure that I am like better off in a privacy standpoint with Meta than I was before, right? So maybe it didn't hit their bottom line or
Well, no,
whatever,
Meta is,
but moving
well,
forward, I observed their practices
yeah.
and behavior is better. And how do you measure their
Well,
practices and
we do it
behavior?
with lawsuits and settlements. It's already happening. Meta explicitly takes your data and explicitly shares it with other users and sells it to advertisers. And you tell them not to do that. You get a court order and you audit them to make sure they're not doing it. I mean, they're not hiding their bad privacy practices. They're trumpeting
Right.
them as a sales pitch to
I don't
advertisers.
think, but I don't think we dislike the service. I think we dislike the privacy
Right.
violations, and so we're okay with them monetizing the service, but not monetizing the privacy violations.
Well,
Right?
we argue about that, but we try to limit the worst of it. And of course, then you try to do things like prevent them from doing it to children below a certain age and things like that.
Sure.
So, I mean, you set rules on it.
Slippery slope.
And right now,
So
Europe's setting
when
all the rules because the American government has no ability to regulate tech because the tech lobby is too powerful here. And everybody's
No, yeah,
just full
that's
steam ahead,
there,
which I must say I generally agree with.
there's a history. The point in history I come back to on that front, Sam, right, is in 2000, 2001, we were on the cusp of having GDPR equivalent here in the US.
Well, we already have it in California
Instead,
supposedly, and the only thing it does is
California hasn't
and
enacted it, but like back then,
no, I think it has, but all it
we-
means is they have to put this stupid consent form on every website. You have to click to go to the website, so it's just
Right.
as useful as
but
the
like,
signs that are
but
up
then they're
everywhere.
flirting with like the capitalism and barriers to entry into market,
Yeah.
right? But like back in 2000, 2001,
Yeah.
we would have had great privacy regulation. But then what happened was September 11th. Instead, we got the Patriot Act. That's the story that I got in interviewing people. It's like,
Well,
like literally there was lobbyists like 20 plus years ago that a lot of us don't remember because it was lobbyists 20 plus years ago going, we need to have some privacy regulations. We need to regulate big tech. And then September 11th happened and
Yeah.
everything changed. And we went to the Patriot Act which is the like complete opposite of privacy regulations, like total opposite. That's where we went.
That's a bait and switch if I ever heard.
Like totally.
Yep.
Was it Dick what was his name that wrote the book on the fifth element, the fifth domain, right? Was cybersecurity.
Right.
Was it Richard Clark, Dick Clark, something like that? What was his name? I interviewed him on the show back in the day. And that was I believe one of the works that kind of hinted towards that whole regulation kind of thing. And what that resulted in is big tech companies as we see today, like Facebook, Google, all the like Amazon, the list goes on, right? And acting more control, because when that pivotal moment happened, we were like national security, and I'm not faulting anyone for that. We were John and Sam and I, like we were around in 2001. Remember that, right? Like
it
that
makes
was
sense
the thing.
that this was
It made sense.
This was
back
the
then,
answer,
right?
or this is the response,
right? And there was several corrections to that. I think the
Right.
Obama administration actually,
but it took a while.
It took a while to kind of peel all that back and kind of level out. But we never ended up with like the advocacy for privacy here in the U.S. and tech companies
Not the way
kind of took
it
over.
could have been.
Right? Some of it's harmless, right? Some of it's like, yeah, I'm interested in this. And
It's just like
big tech companies are like, well, you should see this ad or this, other ad or whatever. And that's not necessarily detrimental. And a lot of us accept that, but it also kind of, it pulled the rug out from under any kind of serious privacy regulations for big tech.
Yeah. Well, it's coming now.
One question. A question I have for Sam when you were looking into this. I don't know if this came across that way to you, but when you were explaining it, and this might say more about how my brain works than how any of this AI stuff works, but it sounded to me like you were describing fuzzing in a way of almost like guided inputs.
It's like that,
and
yes.
using that to infer
and fuzzing,
what's going on.
Yeah, and fuzzing with one of those really strong frameworks, like I think the orange one, where you actually put like tags all through your code. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, with tainting and other such
inputs,
things.
And you don't just measure whether it crashed. You measure how did each
Yes.
module react to this exactly.
Yep, and which paths you got and which paths you didn't, and you're using that to change mutate the input.
Yes, that's very good comparison. And so,
so interestingly, back to your laws of robotics concept. In a way, this is backwards. This approach is reverse engineering the rules into the system rather than building or training the system with those rules.
They aren't talking about putting the rules in yet. I'm just saying that is the motivation for this. If the idea is, for example, one of the most powerful machine learning models is a forest of decision trees, and each AI is just a bunch of if statements, and you have like 500 or 1,000 of them. And you average them together.
Like so many memes of the Scooby-Doo cartoon, right? With it. It's AI, and then they lift the mask off.
If else,
it's a bunch of if statements.
But
right?
The point
is, it's exactly what you're describing.
But
Sam.
the point of that is, you could answer the question, "Why did it do this stupid thing?" It's understandable. There's an if statement. If a parameter is bigger than its value, it did that stupid thing. So if you don't want it to, change that statement, and it won't. And so that you can control. But the large language models are deep neural nets with layers of neurons, and you don't know what they do, but everyone's trying to figure out what they do for this reason, because they're really not under our control right now. They're not. Back in the old days, you would actually write software
So
in a
you
language
are
like
fuzzing
Python
it
or something,
in a
and it would do what
sense.
you told it to. Now you train it like a dog to try to get it to do what you want, but it doesn't 100% learn to do just what you want.
Yeah. This is an interesting concept, because I don't know about you, but everything is somehow an exploitation problem for software,
Sure.
right? Like I just map it all back to software exploitation.
Right.
But it is interesting that in many ways this is sort of the reverse engineering approach of somehow getting to it.
Yeah, and a more
Cool.
logical approach might be to build layers of neurons, having carefully planned them so you actually know what they're doing, and then put another
Or layers in between, right? So that you get some stuff you don't know, but you can.
But the point is, you're solving a problem you don't know how to solve. Like, look out at this picture of the road and tell me if I'm about to hit something. And
I don't actually know if doing the extra layers would actually break the whole thing.
Well,
Like it might
you
just
do
not
know
work
because
now.
you train it. You make it practice until it learns to do it. But the cost is you no longer really understand how it works. And there are a whole lot of flaws.
Is that like, how about a game of chess kind of thing?
Well, another thing about it, which really bothered my class a couple of weeks ago, is you can now, since the AI learned from experience, not from a human programming it, it does not recognize a tree the way we would by seeing a green color and a shape. It just has some combination of pixels that it calls a tree, and you don't even know what that is. So if you take a tree and put like 2 shiny dots on it, suddenly it's not a tree anymore to the AI, even though
or you wear the right shirt with the with the picture of a tree on it or something.
And that's the problem. It doesn't really learn.
Well, and that's the problem with like automated driving systems, right? Like Tesla's kind of been the worst with that.
And there's the problem with all deep neural nets. They learn to do something, but you don't understand what they're doing. That's why there's all this pressure to develop systems to understand what they're doing, and then maybe we can make them work better.
Like I like to impress the passengers in my Tesla by having it do the automated parking. But I've also heard of people like having a horrible experience with that.
Yeah.
And like it actually hit stuff when it was parking, because Tesla made this like decision a few years ago to go to camera telemetry as opposed to any kind of like RF based like sensor
LiDAR
kind of network.
stuff. Yeah.
That's right.
And
save money.
It's taking them a long time to get to the point where they can do that. Really, like if it's raining, dude, and you've got a Tesla, don't do any kind of automated stuff, because it will tell you, like it gives you an alert it's like, I can't see as well as I did before because there's water on the cameras and it's impeding and I'm like, that's bad.
If it's telling you that, you probably should pay attention.
I mean, and Elon Musk insisted on that because he said humans can drive with just vision, therefore the machine can. And that is, in my opinion, bad logic. It is not doing what humans do.
I love my Tesla and all, but like I don't agree
other models.
with that.
I mean, have you met any human drivers too?
Other models have all those extra sensors.
Human drivers also suck, by the way.
It's kind of what I'm saying.
But there was recently
I could cite some pretty heinous, like even in my state, which is really small, some really heinous, awful events that were a result of humans making mistakes.
Well, a few weeks ago, I think the Chinese robo-taxis that are everywhere really do have those multiple sensors. And yet a few weeks ago, they discovered this thing the size of a bumper sticker with a certain pattern of shiny dots, and it makes cars invisible. They don't see it at all. So you can put one of those on a car, and a taxi will just plow right into it, even though it has all those extra sensors.
Beautiful.
Because again...
But we've also seen that with Cruise. I mean, Cruise has some of the...
we've seen that with a lot of things.
Some of the best security researchers in vehicle security in the world working for them right now, and they still have issues. Tesla has a ton of money and resources behind it. They still have issues. We're not there yet.
Nope.
We just talked about every computer being kind of a dumpster fire of this sort of problem. Why is this going to be different?
Well, the computer.
Oh, my friends make fun of me. They're like, dude, you have a car, like you paid all the money for a car and you can't drive it because you have to charge it. And I'm like,
Well,
Yeah, I'm like, but some of
yeah,
that's on
but
me. Some of that's on me too.
yeah.
Like, also, like, if there was more charging stations, that wouldn't be an issue
Mhm.
as
Well,
well. So,
but I mean, there's no point panicking. All of it is the same. They have a success rate and have a failure rate. And the failure
right,
rate is not zero.
right,
You just get it to where they succeed more than they fail, to where you feel like they're beneficial for you. And then you have some plan
Yep.
what to do when they fail.
right. Like, I
Seems
mean,
like
they poke fun
that
at me, but
concept keeps
I'm like,
coming
dude,
back.
I'm like, I haven't pushed my Tesla to like that low battery life in a long
Yeah.
time. And I'm like, you know what? I made it home and I put it on the charger.
Yeah.
So there you have it.
There you go.
Yeah.
But yeah, this idea of like preparing for when things fail, maybe there's something to that.
Yeah.
Mm.
Right.
Well, John, Sam, thank you very much for appearing on Security Weekly for this episode. It's been a lot of fun. We're a little over on time. I was enjoying the discussion so much, I let us go a little over time. So thanks everyone for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time. Over.